and good evening, everyone, and welcome back following the summer recess. Roger.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Welcome to this meeting of Dundee City Council, which is being held remotely in terms of Section 43 of the Local Governance in Scotland Act 2003. All members in attendance are able to fully participate in the meeting, which is being recorded. Should any member need to leave the meeting for any reason, can they please use the chat to advise of this? If a member loses their connection, they should make every effort to rejoin the meeting, but if this is not possible, the Committee Services Officer will note their absence for the remainder of the meeting. If you have to leave the meeting due to a declaration of interest, you must remain out of the meeting until invited back in. Would all members please mute their microphones when not speaking to avoid background noise and turn off any smart speakers. Please start the meeting with your camera on. Your face will appear on the screen when you are speaking. If your connection is poor, you may wish to turn off your camera and see if this improves matters. If this doesn't help, you may wish to quickly leave the meeting and rejoin. If you wish to raise a point of order, ask a question, speak on any item, or move a motion or amendment, please use the chat when the relevant item is called. The convener will then invite you to speak. Would members of the press and public please not post messages in the chat? Where items are for noting, or where there has been no disagreement expressed, the convener will call for any member who has a contrary view to indicate this through the chat, otherwise the item will be agreed. Please would members not use the chat for any other purposes, as those joining the meeting by telephone cannot see the chat and therefore will not be able to follow the debate. Although we are operating in a different way, this is still a formal meeting of the committee, and the required standards of behaviour and discussion are the same as in a face-to-face meeting. Standing orders will apply to the proceedings, and the terms of the Councillors' Code of Conduct will also apply in the normal way. Does any member have any queries regarding this procedure? There are no queries, Lord Provost, so I will now ask the Committee Services Officer to take a roll call for the minute. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now take a roll call for the minute and would ask if members could confirm they are present when I call their name. Lord Provost.
Present.
Councillor Alexander.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Present.
Thank you. Deputy Lord Provost Cardell.
Present.
Bailey Dawson.
I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Ilnakla.
Yep, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Flynn.
Good evening. Present.
Councillor Hunter.
Present.
Councillor Lynn.
Present.
Bailey Roberts.
Good evening, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Rome.
Good evening. Present.
Bailey Soares.
Yes, I'm here.
Councillor Short.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
I'm here.
Councillor Toland.
Yeah, I am here.
Thank you. Bailey Keenan.
I'm present. Can I indicate that Bailey Wright is likely to be absent, and so is Councillor McKerven?
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Cruikshank.
Present.
Councillor Finnegan.
Hello, I'm here.
Councillor McHugh.
Present.
Okay, and as intimated, I've received apologies from Councillor McKerven. Councillor Malone.
Present.
Councillor Scullen.
Present.
Councillor Shears.
Present.
And my understanding is that Bailey Wright is not present at this moment in time. Bailey McPherson.
Good evening. Present.
Thank you. Councillor Coleman.
Good evening.
Thank you. Councillor Crichton.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Duncan.
Here.
And Bailey Scott.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call.
Thank you, Mr. Waddle. Lord Provost, members of the Council, there are two items of business this evening. First, item B, minutes, for information and record purposes.
Agreed.
Thank you. Item
Excuse
C.
me.
Roger, thank you.
No, excuse me, Mr. Menny, Lord Provost. I had actually typed in the chat point, please, because there's an error in the minutes on page 26. My group moved an amendment in relation to the composition of the recess subcommittee, and the detail of our amendment is actually incorrect. It indicates that we were asking for a split of 5, 3 and 2. That is not what we asked for, because that wouldn't have been proportionate in relation to the makeup of the council. We asked for 7, 4 and 2. And I've re-listened to the tape, shall we say, and that's exactly what we did say. So I'd be grateful if the minute were corrected.
Bailey
Roger.
McPherson, please accept my apologies for that error. I will ensure that that is rectified.
That's greatly appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Menny.
Thank you, Fraser. Roger?
Thank you, Lord
Agreed now,
Provost.
Okay, thank you, Roger. On you go.
Thank you, Lord Provost. Item C, General Business, number 1, Standards Commission hearing. Councillor Gregor Murray. You have the decision before you. Thank you, Lord Provost. That concludes the business of the meeting.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Take care and have a good evening. Thank you.
The next committee is the Community Safety and Public Protection Committee.
Good evening. Tonight we were due to have the fire report first. It's now going to be the police report because the area commander has asked if he can go first because he's got another commitment tonight. So it's been agreed that he will go first. So at the last meeting, we asked for the most recent updates for the report tonight. So Police Scotland and Area Commander Ross Fitzgerald, would you like to take us through the report, please?
Hi there, I'll maybe pitch in. So good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you all again. Phil Davison here, the Divisional Commander for Tayside. And I am joined tonight by Ross Fitzgerald, who, as you know, is our local area Commander for Dundee. In terms of the policing report that presented today, it covers the Q4 period, which is the 1st of January 22 to the 31st of March 22. However, the report does focus on year-to-date data from the 1st of April 21 to the 31st of March 22 and the comparable period from the previous year and against the 5-year average. I think it's just indicated there, we've recognised that the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service have also been able to present Q1 performance report today, and it's unfortunate that due to a late release of policing data for this period, we've been unable to afford sufficient timing for presentation of that Q1 report today. However, I would certainly assure members that arrangements have been made to get that Q1 performance report in a matter of weeks to you at the September committee to get the reporting schedule back on track. In terms of the report presented today, the Q4 report gives performance update and associated contextual information against the local police plan, and it shows linkages into the national policing objectives as well as how it supports the Dundee community plan. And as per the last quarter, I would advise members again that the impact of the coronavirus pandemic does continue to make year-on-year comparisons challenging due to the varying levels of restrictions that have been in place over the time and reporting periods. I trust that members have had the opportunity to read the report, on which we certainly wouldn't intend to go over the full detail of. However, I will pass to Chief Inspector Fitzgerald, who will give a brief summary of the key points from the report, and then we'll both be more than happy to take questions as usual. Thank you, everybody, and pass on to Chief Inspector Fitzgerald.
Good evening, Chair and elected members. Just firstly, just a note of thanks on my behalf for the amendment made to the agenda this evening. I'm grateful to that, and it's not unusual for me to ask for it, but it is a pressing issue that I need to go to next. So I am grateful to yourselves and Scottish Fire Rescue Service for accommodating me on this occasion. Just to nip into the report then, so to pick up the broad themes, first and foremost, and to allow kind of plenty of questions afterwards, looking at violence and disorder, we'll see at the end of the performance year at Q4, serious assault, robbery and common assaults, in terms of the numbers of crimes committed, are broadly in keeping with the previous year to date. We've seen an increase in serious assaults of around 15%, albeit that's measured against the previous year and the year before, which were relatively low in terms of numbers. So that increase actually brings it in just below the 5-year average. In terms of robberies, some positive kind of performance statistics there, with a decrease of 14% in terms of numbers of robberies committed, which is the second year in a row we've seen a decrease in those figures, following on from a number of years where they were going in the opposite direction. So some positivity there. And around both crime types, detection rates remaining positive at over 70% for both crime types, with slight reductions on the last year to date, albeit that amounting to 1 or 2 detected crimes in comparison to last year. Looking at the emergency service assaults, an increase of 8%, which is clearly of concern. Those numbers in terms of analysis, the vast majority remain police officers rather than other emergency services workers, and a number of those crimes linked to the custody facility in Dundee, which of course brings in custodies from Perthshire, Angus and North Fife, South Fife, North Fife, sorry, my mistake, which kind of alters those figures to a degree. So overall, a relatively kind of positive place in terms of violence. Into acquisitive crime, a much more challenging set of statistics, as has been reflected across the country in those areas, particularly around motor vehicle crime in the city. So you'll see an increase of just over a third in terms of crimes reported, and lower detection rates than we would like. So I've picked up on those themes within the body of the report, in terms of the impact of cost of living crisis and other socio-economic factors, and also the impact of repeat offenders in terms of detection rates as that kind of goes forward. So I'll let you comment on that within your questions if you have further comment for me. In terms of road policing, some positive statistics there in terms of reductions in speeding, reductions in drink driving, and probably most importantly, reductions in road deaths and serious injury. Of course, the overall strategic plan around road safety and road crime to reduce the number of casualties and injuries that we see on the roads. So positive statistics there, again reflected in the road safety aspect of the report. Moving on to public protection, some really positive statistics in terms of the crime of rape, which are reflected in the summary at the start of the report, with a reduction of nearly 30% in terms of crimes recorded, and again reflected in the overarching kind of Group 2 statistics, which notes a near 10% reduction in sexual crimes reported this year. So positive in terms of reduction in occurrence rates across those crime statistics. Within that public protection space, I would draw your attention to some additional information that's been provided for the end of year report, as that relates to the number of missing person investigations that we have launched this year, and also into the kind of space around concern for person calls, which maybe just touches on that space that's perhaps less well publicised around police work as it relates to the kind of broader kind of public health agenda, and also that kind of a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes in terms of the prevention and mitigating of vulnerability towards those kind of more vulnerable people within Dundee's society. So for me, those are the headlines. The antisocial behaviour statistics are again broken down into multi-member ward area to try and be as relevant to each elected member as possible, and similarly we've reflected the additional detail around hate crime that's been asked for in the past. So hopefully that is a good introduction to the report, and myself and Chief Superintendent Davidson are more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
Right, we've got a list of people waiting to ask questions, so we'll start with Councillor Duncan. Craig.
Yeah, thanks, convener. Just a quick question relating to your summary of reports. I think that'd be page 4 of the police report or page 57 of these committee papers. And it's got to do with the serious organised crime, to wit, drug supply and drug possession, which on the face of it, it show an encouraging decrease. But am I right to think that? I mean, can we think that given that Dundee's, relationship with the drugs is somewhat unfortunate, in the opinion of the police, is the matter getting better or worse?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. I'll maybe pitch in and then hand over to Chief Inspector Fitzgerald. I think the area of drugs is clearly referenced in a number of areas across the report in terms of the impact that drugs and alcohol indeed has on crime. I think you indicate yourself the challenge that Dundee has faced, and we as a key partner with the local authority, with health and many others, have been working really, really hard on the back of the Drugs Commission report to ultimately make inroads to save lives and clearly reduce the harm and impacts around about drugs. Clearly, that focus is multifaceted, where there is the indications on prevention primarily, and if we can get people referred into the right space and look to treat some of the causes from that perspective, then we have a greater chance down the line. And thankfully, over the past couple of years, Dundee's been moving in the right direction in terms of the number of deaths to drugs comparative to where it has been in the past. And I think equally some of the really good initiatives that we've got around about the non-fatal overdose group work, where near misses, for want of a better expression, are able to be signposted and moved into the right services for support at the earliest juncture, is really a positive point. On the policing side, then clearly we have the other aspect around about drug supply and looking to target those that would look to take advantage of those that are vulnerable through drug use, substance use. And whilst the figures are pleasing in terms of less cases, we will not rest on our laurels in respect of that. And I would actively encourage a continued provision of information from members of the public and otherwise, if there's any suspicion around about those that might be involved in the sale and supply of drugs. And indeed, although the percentage figures for supply charges is down, which I think is positive, there has been some quite significant seizures of drugs and enforcement operations still within that. So it's an area we will not be taking our foot off the gas on, I think it's fair to say, and I mean that across the partnership space and the policing space. Chief Inspector Fitzgerald.
Just to pick up on that, I suppose it's that reassurance that any drugs intelligence that is fed into to Dundee LPA, it continues to be managed and assessed robustly, and our job really is to make sure that we're focusing on the right people that are doing the most harm. So I suppose that the numerical kind of reference there is it reflective of what we're doing? I suppose in terms of drugs, unless a drugs crime is detected, then we don't know what's happened, if that makes sense, because we have to go out proactively and find those drugs. So it's difficult to really give you an answer in terms of is it getting worse or better simply based on the statistics. What I would say is our approach is refined, and we have our local community policing teams that are using local intelligence to find people who are supplying drugs, and they are well and truly linked into our kind of national divisions around our kind of our national priorities, so that those who are working across divisions and across the UK are also being targeted through the kind of sophisticated use of the intelligence that we receive. The other positive for me in Dundee is our kind of continued use of Operation Argonite, which kind of continues in the city, which has got kind of two strings to its bow in terms of that kind of drugs enforcement and violence suppression aspect that comes from that, but more importantly, delivering the aftercare for vulnerable people who find themselves tied up in the aftermath of some of those drug supply kind of issues in terms of vulnerability, their houses being used for cuckooing or becoming the repeat victims of offences. So I guess the target, that the numbers for drug supply and drug use is a simplistic way of going about it. There's a real holistic kind of approach to drugs and the impact it has right across our crime statistics. So I hope that gives a sense of how we're targeting drug supply. But yeah, to suggest the problem is solved is a long way from the truth. And we all know we've got significant issues in Dundee, but absolutely determined to try and tackle that head on.
Okay, I'm really obliged for these answers, and yeah, I mean, as you indicate, we're a very long way away from being out of the woods. I mean, Dundee has got a significant problem. I think hopefully there's glimmers of light, but as you indicated, the problem is vast and deep-rooted. It's a multi-agency approach. The police cannot possibly solve it all by themselves, but they are a very important part of it. And the positive message I would take away from what you've been saying tonight is that, contrary to what some frustrated members of the public think, and I hear all too often, the police actually are interested in hearing about, drug suspicions. If people have got ideas about who's doing what, the police do actually want to know about it. So thanks for that.
And next is Councillor Crichton. Michael, have you got a question?
Thank you, convener, and sorry, but I'm having a few technical issues, so I'll stay off the camera. But my question was, can I ask about the vehicle crime figures on page 76? These show a persistent and significant higher occurrence in Dundee than the likes of Angus and Perth and Kinross, other sections of the Tayside division. Can I ask if there's any specific likely reason for this? For example, is it a type of crime more prevalent in urban areas? Is there similarity between other Scottish cities as opposed to other local authority areas in rural areas? So yeah, I just kind of want your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. I'll give just a brief introduction to this, and then I'll pass to Chief Inspector Fitzgerald for the more local part to it. What we've seen actually across the whole of Scotland in this period has been an increase in terms of all aspects of acquisitive crime, and particularly motor vehicle crime. Dundee is not alone in terms of suffering increases in respect of vehicle crime, and Angus and Perth and Kinross have equally been affected, albeit Dundee certainly, as you describe, has caught the perhaps the slightly higher end of that. I think the sort of the prevalence or the urban aspect that you describe will be a factor, and because of the visible and seen rise, it's clearly something that we're concerned about. It's something that we've invested significant resource and activity into. The report describes itself, just a couple of examples around about significant detections attributed to some repeat offenders in the area. To give example of that. But just to give a little bit more local context, I'll pass on to Chief Inspector Fitzgerald just now.
Thank you for that, sir. I would reflect on the same. I think we look at that urban population where we see offences committed in series or patterns. So, for example, across the city, you may find one night where 6 or 7 crimes will be committed by the same individuals, and those kind of crime patterns are not so readily seen in our more kind of rural locations, which tend to be kind of car crimes in isolation. So I think that does play a significant part in the bulk that we see coming through in the numbers. I suppose the other aspect to reflect on from last year is we did see a number of series of housebreaking crimes committed as well, where actually some of those commercial premises that were targeted were kind of garage forecourts, etc., where true keys for a variety of vehicles would be stolen as part of a theft by housebreaking, leading on to a number of car crimes being committed, with those vehicles then used in additional crimes. So I think those two factors together for me are likely why we see those kind of increased rates in Dundee. I would say as well, just to kind of highlight the issue, there's a huge amount of work going on in terms of prevention. We quite often see around a motor vehicle crime, vehicles which are left insecure or with high value items on display are targeted, and we continue to see high numbers of vehicle crimes committed where security of the vehicles has not been kind of fully considered. So we're working hard on that in terms of addressing the kind of preventative measures. As I say, and I've referred to in the report, we have seen significant numbers of crimes committed by small numbers of people within the city who are absolutely determined to kind of involve themselves in acquisitive crime at this particular time. And that's really our focus going into the next performance year. We've added a reactive detective inspector to the management team in Dundee, which is very welcome. And they are now got a real focus on our kind of violent and acquisitive crime across the city and reporting directly into me for the first time on those matters. So recognising the issues that we are taking steps in terms of flexing our resource and bolstering the kind of leadership team around those areas to try and impact on that as we go into the next performance year.
Thank you both.
And we've got Councillor Malone. Charlie, you've got a question?
I've got a comment first, if that's okay, Convener. Obviously, I had an opportunity to meet with Chief Inspector Fitzgerald before recess, and we talked about some of the issues about antisocial behaviour in areas of Charleston and Lochee, and I'm delighted to see some of the activities that have been taken as a consequence of that, particularly the engagement with young people themselves and the businesses that have been affected in the areas. And I've been asked to pass on the gratitude certainly of the retailers in Lochee High Street, the increased police presence, which seems to be having an impact on antisocial behaviour. So I just thought to start off by thanking you for the work you're doing in that area. My question really is about, it's on page 89 when we look at hate crimes by aggravator type. And the one that's showing the biggest year-on-year increase is actually disability. I couldn't find anything really in the commentary that perhaps explained that or gave examples of that. And I just wonder if that could be provided now.
Thanks for the question, Councillor, and also for those positive comments, which are gratefully received, and certainly an area that we know that we've been applying a lot of focus into. I'll pass to Ross in just a second, because I don't have a direct answer for you just around about the disability bit. I'm not sure if he will have or not, but certainly hate crime in any guise will not be tolerated. And thankfully, compared to comparative to other areas of the country, offences remain low in respect of hate crime. We certainly don't rest on our laurels in this regard, though, and want to clearly keep a focus on the identification and detection of offenders when we do get such offences, and certainly to look towards increasing confidence to report hate crime as well, particularly through third-party referral groups, etc. But if Ross doesn't have the answer specifically around about the disability aspect of your question, then I am sure we can come back to you separately. I'll just pass over to Ross.
Well, thank you. I think Councillor Miller, thank you for your kind of your gracious comments around activity in Lochee around antisocial behaviour as well. I'll certainly pass that on to Inspector Patty and his community teams led by Sergeant Peachy, because I'm sure they will take a real boost of encouragement from your comments. So thank you for that. In terms of disability and hate crimes, I suppose I would offer that reassurance that although the percentage change is quite high, the number of crimes that differs is relatively low. I think it's 15 crimes in comparison to the previous year. But from my kind of tasking meeting, we've got a real focus on making sure that the appropriate hate crime aggravators are attached to in all instances of these crimes. I suppose I had from last year some misgivings in terms of whether we were actually picking up on disability-related hate crime as clearly as we should be. So I think it's more around a kind of positive kind of mindset and really looking for that information from victims of crime as we engage with them. That's potentially part of the issue. What I would say is I'm entirely convinced we don't have an issue of any kind of organised approach to an increase in those crimes. They remain sporadic. They're generally highly unplanned and generally relate to kind of spur of the moment incidents where there is kind of conflict or difficulty in that environment, rather than something that we're seen as a kind of pre-planned approach to undermine kind of vulnerable members of that particular kind of protected characteristics. So that would be my general sense in terms of us being a bit more refined and detailed in our approach to recording hate crime, really picking up on the vulnerability issues there and doing our utmost to try and protect vulnerable people within that particular protected characteristic. However, just based on your question, I'll take that away from the meeting, Councillor Malone, and have I'll speak to our kind of local community analysts and see if there is any other kind of factors at play that I've not touched on tonight, and I can certainly email you in due course if that's okay.
Convener, if I could just come back in and Ross, thank you for that. That information would be actually quite helpful. I guess my concern is that what we've got is a table that's got actual numbers, but what we don't have is these numbers as a proportion of the general population. So I don't have any kind of understanding about the proportion of disabled people in Dundee as opposed to perhaps people of religious faith. So it's quite difficult in the figures to understand what's going on. Now, it might be that I have seen on social media people complaining about people using disability badges at supermarkets and stuff like that. So I don't have a sense. So, but if Ross, if you could maybe just kind of have a look and just so it can be reassured, all hate crime is evil. Right? All hate crime is evil. The hate crime against disabled people as well has to be condemned as all other forms of hate crime are, quite rightly. But thank you for that.
Right, next we've got Billy Dawson. Will, got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Christina. It's in relation to pages 81 and 82 of the report, and officers may remember that one of my big bugbears going way back was always inclusion of the information on the safety camera unit within this report and actually how it's working and how it's operating. So I'm pretty glad to see in the report that it says that there's utilisation of flexible deployment sites. And I do appreciate the need to continue to support and monitor priority routes, but for me, it doesn't give me an indication on how flexible these other sites have been or where they have been. So you might not be able to give me this evening, and clearly appreciate. I don't think there's anyone from roads policing on the call either. But what information can we really have on this flexible deployment? Because I know from my own ward, there's plenty of areas in my ward that would absolutely love to see the vehicle. And I do think sometimes that this sort of rigid approach to having it, I say around about on Green Dykes, for example, where I think it should be on Craigie Avenue, is restrictive because people get used to where it is. So I'm just wondering, can you give me any sort of information on how flexible this approach has been and what other sites have been sort of looked at out with the normal ones that we all know and love?
Thanks, Billy Dawson, for the question. Again, as with the others, I'll lead in and then I'll pass over to Ross if there's any additional context he can provide. But certainly the focus for road safety is based on data, it's based on information, and it's based on concerns that are raised with us. So the culmination of accident statistics, speeding, culmination data, speed monitoring equipment, and community concerns as well are all clearly fed into the analytical aspect of our road safety team to determine locations that we would be looking to deploy to, and that is where the flexibility comes in. So there'll be an element of the highest hitting roads, routes and roads of concern that will almost be primary default locations for clear reasons, just in terms of the risks that might be applied across them. But equally, that flexibility is there for deployment to other areas, and whether that be concerns that start to come in and become raised in and around about a residential area near to a school, or a particular B road that may be subject of whether it be antisocial behaviour, vehicle challenge, or reports of increased speed coming in. So that's where the flexibility comes in. We have daily tasking meetings that look at the priorities and the prioritisation around about where to deploy the assets, and clearly as new concerns emerge, they are then factored in alongside those more standing and analytically led deployments that we would see. In terms of specific locations for the Dundee locality, I'm afraid I don't have that knowledge. I've just got that broad sense of how how we clearly approach the use of the information that we get. But Ross may have that bit more information, and if not, we can certainly get that back to you. Ross?
Just to pick up on those points there. So clearly the national strategy is really surrounding kind of road deaths and road casualties and how we reduce that. So statistically, the higher speed roads result in kind of more significant injury, which is why we see the cameras used in particular kind of routes through the city more often than others, which is kind of designed to support that national strategy. Now, I have the kind of local concerns around, as you say, those residential streets where high numbers of complaints may be coming in around speeding. And the local approach to that is, generally speaking, to do some testing around the mean speed of the street, because we sometimes find that it's actually the perception of speed in narrower roads where there's lots of parked vehicles, for example, is the issue rather than actually the speeds themselves. So there is that kind of testing that goes on in order to kind of prioritise the best place for those cameras to go. And the other aspect, which is probably worthy of touching on, is just the technical aspect as well. That in terms of the camera vans themselves, there are kind of some specs in terms of where they can be parked to be effective, because they need a kind of line of sight in vehicles going in different directions. So some streets are perhaps not as easy to deploy on as others. However, I can speak to Inspector Greg Burns, who's a kind of National Roads Policing inspector, but based in Dundee. And just to build on some of those responses, I can certainly come back to you with further detail. But for me, it is that mixture of analysing mean speed and trying to provide as best a response to residents as we can, but also working within the technical aspects of the van. I guess the other aspects I would speak about as well is that, aside from the van, we are very responsive to the kind of reports around speeding that we do receive. The van is not the single way that we've got to tackle kind of speeding vehicles, and we do still regularly deploy both community policing officers and roads policing officers with handheld equipment and other devices in streets where perhaps the mobile van is not quite so usable. So I guess I'll give you that as a response tonight, but again, happy to come back to you with some further detail around the way that we choose to deploy across the city.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I certainly know from experience recently that there has been a number of concerns, and I've raised them with site development, so hopefully they've come back to yourselves, which is always sometimes my concern that it doesn't necessarily get back to you. But, Green Dykes is the prime example. Everybody knows the vehicle will be there at some point. However, just round the corner, going on to Craigie Avenue, or even strips of Craigie itself coming down that hill, you can quite often, and I think I'm a reasonably good judge of speed, to be quite honest, but I've tried to cross Craigie Avenue recently, and some of these vehicles were tanking it down the road, for the want of a better expression. So I just sometimes think that, having it a little bit too rigid and having it where people expect it is maybe the wrong thing to do. But no, thank you for that, and I wouldn't mind getting some more information if that's possible.
So just on your communication point as well, I'm more than happy to receive direct emails on that point. We can maybe just discuss directly to try and support you as best I can off table, but I'll come back to you on that front.
That's great, Ross. Thanks.
Councillor Shears. Pete, you've got a question?
Yeah, excuse me, thank you. I've actually got two, if that's okay. One very short and one which might take a little bit longer. My first question is the same question I asked when the last report here came to us, was about stop and search. And again, good to see that the assurance reports showing no disproportionate searching around age and ethnicity. Could I get the more detailed report again, which I think I got from yourself, Ross? And in future, would it be possible just to have a small table on the reports that just sort of breaks down by ethnicity so we can see what's going on?
Yeah, Councillor, certainly no problem at all. But just to give you a wee bit of reassurance around Q4, I think there was 204 stop searches recorded, of which 193 were targeted towards individuals who expressed their ethnicity as being white or white other. So more than content that the stop search is being directed in the right way, and ultimately our positive returns are sitting in the region of 48% in terms of the searches we've conducted, which again is well in advance of national averages and gives me complete confidence that we're acting using statutory powers and we're being intelligence-led in the approach to stop search.
Yeah, very reassuring. So on my longer question, it's to do with page 43 of the report, and specifically around possession. I can see that is down significantly on the 5-year average. Now I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was about 2020, there was a change in the way that the police or the courts prosecute possession, in that people with very minor amounts wouldn't be prosecuted, or at worst would have a warning. So do we think this reduction is due to that change in legislation, or is it a sign that drugs on our streets is at a lower level than it was last year, 2 years ago, and over the 5 years?
So I'm going to take that one. It's a good question. So the change that you described was essentially the Lord Advocate's decision to widen access to the recorded police warnings option of possession for a controlled drug, and that would give officers another tool to make the appropriate and discretionary disposal somebody in possession of a small amount of a drug. What I would be really clear in saying, though, is that a recorded police warning is still a criminal justice disposal, which means that it is placed on a person's criminal record, and therefore the drug possession figures that we see will include those of a recorded police warning, and clearly any subsequent of a person that's had a warning, they would then not be eligible for a warning, so that would become then a report, a direct report. So much like the earlier questions, I think the trend in volume of instances we are finding people in possession is a positive indicator. I think that there are other aspects as well, though, to drugs possession. So trends we are seeing in terms of the types of drugs being used, and a greater shift into the more online purchases and mechanically driven tablet format drugs than our traditional drugs that you would see. It does tend to change habits and behaviours a little bit as well. I don't know, Chief Inspector Fitzgerald, whether there's any additional you want to add to that?
All I would say is that, again, just referencing back to my previous answer, we're clear in terms of our use of intelligence, and we're really kind of focused on trying to deliver those searches to the correct people in the correct circumstances. So reflecting on kind of drug addiction as a health issue, we are absolutely trying to target those who are supplying and selling drugs in order to try and reduce the harm that it causes across the city, and whilst also doing our level best to support vulnerable drug users towards recovery. And we see that reflected through kind of the approach of the non-fatal overdose group, which is now kind of pretty much cemented in daily activity around Dundee, where we pick up on those individuals who are found having suffered a non-fatal overdose and try and provide that support as early as possible, and also through kind of schemes such as our custody arrest referral scheme. So any individual coming through custody whose offending is linked to drug taking, again, receives an input from third sector charity while still within the police custody centre, in order to try and use that arrest as an opportunity to bring some kind of positivity and support in place. So, again, reflecting on the earlier answer, we only record kind of drugs crimes that we detect. So it's really difficult to try and kind of reflect on whether or not that's a genuine reduction in drug taking, or just an anomaly with the figures. But what I would say is, across the board, in terms of that health perspective, the provision of support and the way we're using intelligence, I think we're making some really strong steps in the right direction. Sorry, I'm not sure what happened to the volume there. I'm not sure if you're still hearing me, but hopefully I've finished on the positive note of making strong steps in the right direction. But as I say, certainly the numbers themselves don't tell the whole story, but we've still got work to do. But yeah, reflecting positively on the support that's now in place for those using drugs across the city. Is
that okay, Pete?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Right, thanks. Next we've got Councillor Flynn. Mark, you got a question?
Yeah, thanks, convener. And I've got a couple of points actually with regard to road policing, which I'd like to just clarify, if that's okay. We're talking about speeding, which was touched upon earlier, but the speeding reduction is 22.5%, it says in the report, which is great to see. But I don't actually know what that means with regards to the trunk roads or what's in the localities. And I think that would be helpful, bearing in mind what Councillor Billy Dawson's just noted, the fact that the impact on our communities is probably would be helpful to know, because I think most of this is probably, I would probably guess, it's probably on a trunk road, where most of the vehicles will probably be detected. So I'll get some more data on that. That would be really helpful. But following on from that, some of the things you've actually touched upon with the community police support, I want to refer to the safer streets in the school and exclusion zones, which we have passed at committee in Dundee City Council to take on board going forward. One at Fintry Primary School, and we've got another 5 planned in the near future. There's also one down at Fort Hill. And now we're at, in this report, in the period you're talking about, the report I've got back from officers, we're actually seeing a continuous infringement of these areas. And the only people that can actually stop them are yourselves. And I'm looking for your support, actually, to make sure that we actually look to enforce that with the community officers, as you mentioned earlier, who are likely to be available. I don't expect them to be there every morning, every afternoon, for example. We've worked together on doing this with regards to the signage, the consultations, the comms with parents and guardians, etc. We've done all the sort of work we needed to do and worked along with yourselves. And I'd like to have that reassurance that going forward, as in school, the new school year has just started, that your support in enforcing these areas would be welcomed.
And so thanks very much for the question. I'll pass on to Chief Inspector Fitzgerald for that, for the local aspects there in terms of the exclusion zones, the safer streets work, and the part there. But I suppose around about the speeding trunks fee localities, just that assurance, we'll take that away and have a look at that. And perhaps to offer, I did so for the Angus committee, that we've had a lot of questions today around about road safety, that maybe for a future meeting, what we'll do is I'll maybe invite Inspector Burns along, who has that roads policing portfolio that covers the Tayside area, and that would perhaps give members the chance to hear directly from our main roads policing lead. So I put that offer out to you, as that's another question on this subject area, but I'll pass on to Chief Inspector Fitzgerald just now.
No, thank you again. I'm grateful for Councillor Flynn's kind of commitment and mention of the work that the local authority is doing as well. I think it is absolutely right that those kind of safer streets initiatives need to be kind of delivered in partnership, and Police Scotland clearly have a very strong part to play in that. I'd like to offer that reassurance that I think a meeting with other councillors later in this week, I think Friday morning, to kind of start some discussion around safer streets. I think with that kind of particular focus on the school exclusion zones. So it is absolutely something that's on my agenda in terms of how we deliver that going forward. But I think you're right, obviously, in terms of the range of activities that our community policing teams do. They've got a broad range of activity and a finite resource. So we absolutely will need to be proportionate our response, but clearly understand our responsibilities in terms of keeping our vulnerable kind of road users safe, such as our children, particularly when they're going to and leaving school. So absolutely share Councillor Flynn's concerns, and as we step into that kind of education space and deliver some enforcement that goes alongside that, then hopefully those kind of parents, particularly, and others in that area, start to take heed of the zones, which are clearly there for the benefit and safety of local people.
Come back, Christina. Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much. I'd certainly take up the offer to have the inspector from the policing side, the road policing side, would actually be welcomed. I think that would be very helpful to get some insight from him at the next committee, if that's possible. And thank you for the support and what we're trying to do with the school exclusion zones, because I read with interest about the Angus schools, where the local sergeant from the road policing was actually quite clear they'd actually be doing some enforcement and applying enforcement powers as required, with fixed penalties if needed for continuous use and can imagine repeat offenders going forward. But I think we really need to step this up. We are going to step it up within the local authority. So I really welcome your support, and I look forward to that support going forward. And thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Next, we've got Bailey Scott. Derek, you got a question?
Yes, please. Can I first of all thank Chief Inspector Fitzgerald for inviting the local members to go on a walkabout with him in Central Broughty Ferry following the high level of antisocial behaviour that was reported earlier in the summer. Can I ask if there are still plans in place to react quickly should there be a repeat of that in any of the sunny weekends we might have left before the autumn, because the high visibility police response was well received by residents? And also, can you confirm if the number of antisocial complaints for that area have now fallen back down to more historic levels?
Billy Scott, thanks for the question. I'll actually just refer straight to Chief Inspector Fitzgerald on this one.
No, thank you for the question, Councillor Scott, and again, grateful for your time on that particular evening as well as we had a wander around Broughty Ferry. I think it was kind of constructive on both sides. And I would just probably give you that kind of bit of reassurance that as the majority of those problems kind of fell into the Q1 kind of period, it was my intention to give a kind of fuller update on the issues in Broughty Ferry within the context of that report. So that'll certainly land in September. Purely because we know how much kind of impact it had locally and across the kind of city because of the press pickup on that. So what I can kind of provide that reassurance that the kind of community policing team at Broughty Ferry are well on top of that issue. We've continued with high visibility patrols in the area despite kind of reducing numbers of youths seen in the area, but absolutely have plans that can be reenacted should we see a kind of further spike towards the end of the summer. But hopeful that return to school and the structure that brings to some of our younger people will be, impacted in terms of behaviours that we've seen kind of early evenings across the week. And we've certainly seen reducing numbers recently to the extent that, complaints are really at very low levels again, and more redolent of what we normally see. So a positive picture, I think a positive response in terms of across the kind of local authority, not only from ourselves, but the positive what we received from kind of community wardens and others in the local authority who were very kind of quick to ensure that any kind of damaged rubbish, etc., was cleared to make sure that the ferry area remained as positive and as pleasant an environment for all to be seen as possible. And I suppose I would just kind of stress that point as well, that the vast majority of the young people who were there, I don't think had any intent to cause alarm, disturbance or commit crime, but we did see that small number who tarnished the reputation of all of the others. So the bit for us is about identifying them as we did, getting them taken home and actually positively engaging with parents to highlight what those behaviours were and how they can do their bit to support the kind of reduction in antisocial behaviour we've seen. So definitely an improving picture, but we're always mindful of the potential for it to increase again as we go forward, and we'll keep that on our radar.
You okay with that, Derek?
No, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie, you've put down you want another comment. No, you don't. Right. Next we've got Councillor McHugh. Dorothy.
Thank you. I don't propose to waste much time in discussion here, but I have a query, page 97 of the bundle, which talks about supply of drugs and quality intelligence. And I'm really looking for advice on direct contact with, how to give over this intelligence. What is the best way? What is the process? I've had a number of calls from constituents with intelligence about drug supply in their neighbourhoods, and I'm really not sure where to take this. Now, we could maybe do this offline. I could email someone and perhaps they could give me some additional information on that.
Thanks very much for the question. Oh, sorry. Ross, I think we'll both probably end up saying the same thing. Pitch on if you want.
No, I was just going to give that Councillor McHugh that reassurance that I'm more than happy to pick up that kind of request as over the next kind of couple of days. I'll make direct contact with you and we can discuss that to make sure that you've got the information you're required to pass on to your constituents.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
And the last name I've got on my list is Councillor Rome. Stephen.
Thank you, Christina. There's been a lot of really worthwhile comments. I won't keep us any longer. I agree with everything that's been said, but I just wanted to go back to the comments by Councillor Flint and just thank you for your comments, Chief Inspector Fitzgerald. I'm looking forward to our meeting later in the week regarding the safer streets around Fintry Primary School, and I do appreciate the situation with resources. They don't call you the thin blue line for nothing. There's a lot of demands on officer time, but hopefully we can get a model that works here. We can get a model that works going forward. So again, thank you for your comments on resources, and I look forward to our meeting later on in the week.
Kevin's asking if that information could be circulated, so I would imagine that would be possible. I take it it's the one about the drugs.
The information that was going to be given to Councillor McHugh.
Yeah, we can get something around all members. Essentially, there's multiple means in which we can clearly receive information. Crime Stoppers as a primary one is a good source for the public to dial into. There's online availability for reporting, whether anonymous or not, direct to officers through some of our partner agencies and otherwise. So we'll get the range of opportunities and options available shared.
I'm not seeing any more questions for Police Scotland, so I'd like to thank both Phil and Ross for coming along tonight, and go and enjoy your evening or go and do some more work.
No, thank you, Chair. I'll hang about to the end of the fire report just in case there's anything that crosses over, but I know Chief Inspector Fitzgerald needs to drop off, so really appreciate you taking us first.
Okay, right, thank you. Next item on the agenda, please.
Convener, can I just take us back to item 1 just to check if there's any declaration of interest? No.
I'm seeing head shaking, so I'd say
Okay,
no.
thank you. So item 3 is Scottish Fire and Rescue Service Quarterly Performance Report, 1st of January to 31st of March 2022.
Right, I've seen both Scott and Graham on the call tonight, so if one of you'd like to take us through the first report, please.
Thanks, Convener, and good evening, members. Firstly, I'd like to introduce the Quarter 4 report for the 21-22. I'll then proceed to introduce the Quarter 1 report for 22-23, and again ask members to scrutinise, question and note the content within as per normal procedures. So I'll start by turning to page 10 of your bundle of your report pack, which you will see the performance summary for Quarter 4. I'll guide you through this prior to handing over to Group Commander Smart for some further context. What I propose is to then come back to page 34 of the bundle and again go through the performance highlights for Quarter 1 before handing back to Group Commander Smart, and then following that, happy to answer any questions on either report. Following this, we'll then be back in line with the scrutiny timeline and up to date with the Quarter 2 reporting later on this year. So firstly, onto the Quarter 4 report. As I said, I'll just briefly go through some of the performance highlights for the end of year report. So accidental dwelling fires below the target, although our non-fatal casualties have seen a slight increase, and we have unfortunately seen the tragic loss of 1 person to fire this year, with additional that I will mention in the Quarter 1 report. Just to make rest assured for councillors that we do investigate each of these with partners to identify any learning opportunities and continue to work as a partnership to eliminate these occurrences as much as we can. Moving on from that, our non-domestic fires, they've seen a slight increase in Quarter 4, but subsequent casualties remain low for the year and show green and amber for the whole year. Overall, RTC numbers remain average for the year with no fatalities, which is pleasing, and a slight increase in non-fatal casualties. We've seen very little change in our number of unwanted fire alarm signals and continue to engage with duty holders and subsequently reduce our blue light journeys and maintain business continuity as much as possible. And finally, for the Quarter 4 report, our deliberate fires are seeing a large increase, which is quite disappointing given the amount of work that we do with partners to reduce these. However, we will continue to make this our main area of focus going forward. And that really concludes the performance highlights for Q4. I'll just ask Group Commander Smart if there's anything additional he would like to highlight from the report.
Thanks, Air Commander Gibson, and good evening to everyone. I'd like to expand just a little further in relation to accidental dwelling fires, or ADFs, as we call them, and you'll see that summarised in the report, and also touch on the fatal and non-fatal casualties. So again, in your bundle on page 13 of your combined report, so 24% of ADFs during Q4, and again, just a little bit more context for you, they occurred within single occupancy dwellings, with almost half of these attributed to cooking-related incidents in particular. And this has also been a similar trend when compared to previous quarters throughout the year. As Mr. Gibson highlighted, tragically, we've experienced one fire fatality over the year, which occurred during the previous quarter, in Q3, and unfortunately, that's exceeded our annual aim of striving for 0 fire deaths in the city. And again, as Mr. Gibson alluded to there, we do have our case conferences for every fire death in the city. And I'll just touch on that in a moment when we're actually talking in respect of Q1 report. In terms of non-fatal fire fatalities, we've experienced a 10% increase during Q4 compared with last year's figures. And again, these incidents mainly involved combustible materials accidentally placed too close to a heat source, either through cooking or through the use predominantly of candles or matches in the bedroom. Moving on to page 22, again, of your bundle report, just a little bit of a focus more on deliberate fires and deliberate secondary fires. So deliberate primary fires have decreased by almost 28% on the previous quarter, which is very encouraging. The majority of these fires took place, just for your interest, in the early evening, predominantly in grassland and woodland areas, with areas of Dundee being Strathmartin and the northeast of the city experienced the highest amount. And again, if you want to look at page 24 in terms of our community safety engagement initiatives, so again, we've provided some examples there for you in respect of our involvement of partners ongoing partnership working, highlighting the social impact, the anti-social impact of these fires occurring. So what we've been focusing on is leaflet drops and local engagement with our community action team, which are ongoing again to minimise these types of incidents occurring. So on that, I'll pass you back to Area Commander Gibson, and what we'll do now is run through Q1 report for you, and I'll give you some more local context, and then we'll take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, members, moving on to Q1 report then. Again, the number of accidental dwelling fires is quite similar to previous years. However, as I just previously mentioned, we have tragically seen a further 2 fire deaths in the city in quite a short space of time. We are finding that these fire deaths are predominantly aligned with those that we target through our Make the Call campaign, in that they are over 50, usually smokers, living alone, and a lot of the time have mobility issues. So we continue to publicise this campaign, and again encourage people to seek help or help others seek help should they see this type of situation, and we can come out and carry out some kind of visit and provide some safety information and safety advice. And again, we continue to work with our partners to identify any areas that we can improve on. Again, Q1 non-domestic fires, we've seen a slight increase again over the quarter, but no trends or areas of concern for myself. And we'll also have no concerns around road traffic collisions in the Dundee area at present. Unwanted fire alarm signals we've seen is on a slight downward trend, which is good. However, again, deliberate fire setting through Q1, as with the previous quarter, has seen quite a large increase. I think a lot of this has probably been exacerbated by the recent hot and dry weather, but just be assured that we do continue with our multi-agency approach to tackling this, along with antisocial behaviour that is usually associated with it. And on that note, I'll hand you back to Group Commander Smart for any further context on the Q1 report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson. So, similar to my comments on Q4 as well, I'd like to provide you with further just some local context in respect of Q1's performance. So, as just mentioned there, tragically, during the month of June, we experienced 2 separate fire fatalities within the city. Again, if you scroll over to page 37 in particular, I'll just give you some further context to that, into these fires. So, just a little focus on that highlights that these took place yet again in single occupancy dwellings. Mr. Gibson's just alluded to there with the over 50 campaign, and like I say, when I look at some of the analysis of both of these fires, that is exactly the trend that we're experiencing here. So again, in the areas of the city, so it was in Coldside and also the northeast areas of Dundee, both did involve smoking related sources of ignition, which then spread to furniture or furnishings. And again, in terms of time of day, one occurred late afternoon, and then the other one was in early evening time. A little bit more of a focus on non-fatal casualties for the quarter. So they've reduced by almost 65% actually against the previous quarter, which is very encouraging, and also reduced when compared with the same period for last year for the same quarter. Again, the majority of these fires involved faults in equipment or appliances, which were either in storage cupboards, in particular under stairs, or also in the kitchen. And if you move on to page 45, just a little bit of focus again on deliberate primary and secondary fires. So again, deliberate primary fires, they've increased by 4 compared to the same period last year. And also deliberate secondary fires have actually decreased compared with the same quarter last year. Although, as Mr. Gibson's mentioned, we have quite a significant rise over the Q1 period, and in particular, the summer months that we've just been experiencing. And again, on page 47, in terms of examples of our youth engagement and ongoing education initiatives, which again, we're looking to focus on, including to reduce antisocial behaviour that are often attributed to these types of fires. A particular focus that we're looking at just now and continuing over the summer months has been our efforts from a multi-agency context with safeguarding derelict buildings within the city, engaging with, in particular, the building owners and premises responsible persons, again in an effort to make sure that these are as secure as they possibly can be and to try and reduce opportunities for deliberate fire setting. That concludes our input on both reports, everyone, and we'd like to take this opportunity to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. The first question is from Councillor Short. Lynn.
Thank you. Graham, you'll be pleased to hear my straighteners, my hairdryer, my curling irons, all those things that were previously an issue have all gone away. I don't have to worry about them now. So one rest down, but I was really concerned when I saw on social media recently the issues with some of those charging and mobile chargers and things that you've got. Do you do multi-agency delivery into schools, etc., just about warnings with regards to make sure you're buying it and it's got X, Y, and Z to make sure that it's the bona fide type of charger that you're buying?
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Short. And yeah, if you would like me to comment on that, does seem fairly extreme measures to make sure that you're safe in your house with using your straighteners. But I welcome your efforts there, so thank you very much for that. But no, just in relation to your concern on social media with charging devices, and you are absolutely right, and it's not just an issue in the local area, it's nationwide and even globally in terms of obviously the technology that everybody has access to these days. To be honest with you, whether it's a bona fide product or not, again, if you're talking about any particular brands, it doesn't really change anything in terms of the advice that we would give in terms of leaving anything like that plugged in unattended. And again, just to remind everyone that don't think that because it's plugged in and switched on, but not actually connected to a device, that you can't have any issues with that. And again, it's just that usual information and advice about not leaving anything switch on unattended, because there is the possibility that the batteries in the devices can overheat, or again, actually the plugs themselves. There is ongoing input and education that we constantly provide, not only to the younger generation, but just to the community as a whole. And yeah, it's always something that our community action team are always focusing on.
Councillor Swan, if I can just add, I'll just add to that just a little bit. We've recently reinvigorated our safe Taysiders that we deliver to all the primary fives at school, which is a multi-agency approach. So that was put on hold during the pandemic, but that's recently been reinvigorated virtually for this year, and going forward we'll continue to do that. So that gives all school-age children that safety input across all areas of the multi-agency. So that was all.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I suppose the other thing is, it is this time of year when the students come, so presumably you'll have some kind of presence at Freshers' Fair as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we link in with our local authority liaison officer and again the community action team. So yeah, all of the initiatives that go on during Freshers' Week, and especially now this will be effectively the first full year from obviously the impact of COVID. So yeah, there's obviously going to be far more focus on that in terms of the residences.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Councillor Coleman. Daniel, you got a question?
Yes, thank you, Madam Convener. Can I ask further about the deliberate primary fires? The information on page 21 shows 109 in the last year, above the annual target of 60. Then on page 45, it shows 28 deliberate primary fires, an increase on Q1 last year. Unfortunately, we do see a steady increase year on year on that. We'll go from 18 to 21, 24 last, 28 this. Can I ask which categories of deliberate primary fires this increase has come from? Are most from domestic or non-domestic properties or motor vehicles? And are there specific actions that will be taking to tackle this matter?
Thanks very much.
Start if you want.
Yeah.
If you want, Graham. So just on the types of deliberate primary fire, I can ask Graham to elaborate on that now, and if he doesn't have that information to hand, we can come back with that information, Councillor. In regards to the multi-agency approach, we'd obviously act as part of the MATAC and engage with a lot of the youth groups, more so now than we have been doing during the pandemic. I know that a lot of the deliberate primary fires involve outdoor structures because they come under that category as well. But yeah, just to be assured, I suppose, that we are continuing, and probably more so than we have been over the last couple of years, to get back out there as an organisation with some visible presence with our community action teams and as part of that multi-agency team as well, to try and engage with the people that are involved in these types of incidents. And I'm not sure, I'll pass over to Graham to see if he's got any further information on the types.
Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Coleman. So I don't have specific information at hand right now to give you, for example, within Q1, just exactly what the full breakdown of the 20 incidents are. However, I can get you that information and I can contact you later off table if that would be helpful for you. But yeah, again, just to reiterate Mr. Gibson's point that you know, it does have an influence on how we categorise primary fires. Again, for example, what we would class as a derelict building wouldn't necessarily be recorded as a deliberate primary fire. So again, if you allow me to obviously go into that level of detail with you separately, I'd be able to explain that further for you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Matt. Thank you, Mr. Gibson.
Councillor Flynn. Mark, you've got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Convener. It's more to do with just following on from the previous question with regards to the deliberate primary and secondary fires and the increase in these. You mentioned the increase in grassland fires, for example, and fires in derelict buildings. We have a number of them across the city. First question would be, do you actually liaise with the owners of these buildings to ensure that they're as safe as possible going and any discussions you might have with that? And following on from that, just for the reassurance, if there was a number of serious fires in the city, during COVID, I believe you actually changed your rota and your firefighter numbers to obviously cope with the COVID measures. Are we fully back up to speed with pre-pandemic setup, pre-pandemic teams on the firefighter wagons, for example? Is that all back to normal, just for that reassurance in case there was a more than one deliberate fire within the city?
Okay, I think I can take the second part of that question, I think, Councillor Flint, and then hand over to Graham for the first part. So yeah, in regard to the numbers of firefighters on appliances, the numbers, we did obviously put plans in place over the COVID period to ensure that we could provide a full, as full a capacity as we could throughout that whole time. Because of the restrictions that were placed on us in the government guidelines at the time, we weren't able to run our training courses as full as we would have normally. So that reduced the numbers over the period. And since coming back to easing of restrictions, we've now increased the numbers of trainees that we are putting on our current courses, and we're using other means such as overtime, etc., in the interim to make sure that we've got a full complement within the area and within Scotland across our fire appliances, with the ultimate aim that we will reach our target operating model over the next few months as we increase the numbers on courses going forward. Hopefully that answers your question. I'll hand you over to Graham for the first part of that about the derelict buildings, because he's done a bit of work on this.
Thanks, Councillor Flynn. So yeah, it is a good question. I thank you for obviously highlighting that. So in particular, and again, to give you some examples, you'll be aware of obviously the old college building on Constitution Street, and we've also got House of Grey just on the outskirts of Dundee. There's probably two good examples which have been in that condition for actually a couple of years now. We had a bit of a focus, even actually during COVID in particular, with House of Grey, which has seen, unfortunately, an increase in activity. And then we do have the new housing estate, which is nearby. So again, we do have a larger number of people now residing in that area, whereas prior to that, we really have very little involvement in that building, although it's been derelict for a number of years. Your main question, again, is a very good point in terms of, are we liaising with the building owners? And the answer is absolutely yes, we are. However, it is not always very straightforward in that case. Not only ourselves are we trying to obviously engage that, so like anything, it really is a multi-agency approach with that. Depending on the type of building that it is, and again, who the actual owners are, that can make it rather problematic to engage with them. Another example that we'd give you would be the fire that we recently had in Brook Street in Dundee at the old mill. Again, we've had some significant efforts there with our colleagues in the council to try and identify the owners of the building. We had evidence there of scrap tyres being stored within there, which exacerbated the fire loading within that, and it made it quite a significant fire to actually deal with in that sense. But absolutely, that is our strategy moving forward with that, is to identify these premises early, as quickly as possible, make sure that we keep them secure. Again, the Dundee College building in particular has been a bit of a hotspot for that in terms of access. It is a particularly difficult building because it's obviously on a steep gradient. There is still a significant fire loading within the premises. And our two absolutes, from our own strategy and fire safety strategies, is firefighter safety and community safety. So it's not only if we get intelligence that there may be youths within there, which is obviously our main concern, but obviously another major focus for ourselves is that we don't necessarily want to commit our firefighters into these buildings again when it's extremely hazardous for them, not only just to deal with the fire, but the actual dangerous condition of these buildings. So it's a bit of a two-pronged attack in terms of that sense, which our two absolutes have never changed.
Can I just thank you both for your reassurances on both points with regards to the firefighter levels and also the fact that you are looking into that. It's my ward, the old college building, so I've got a keen interest in actually seeing that get safely in its current situation, because it is a grave concern that if that does go on fire, and there's a lot of issues with people breaking into it, or young folk breaking into it, etc. So thanks very much for that reassurance that you're actually on top of that.
Thank you.
Bailey Keenan, Kevin.
Thank you. Maybe a couple of questions. I'm just hearing about the fatalities, wondering if there is a need for some sort of review of a multi-agency approach to for a spotter referrer, so as that even families could maybe make referrals for the fire brigade to come and visit people. So I'm wondering if there's any thoughts on that. And the other question is in relation to the fire at Dyborough Industrial Estate, given that it was 4 pumping appliances and an aerial ladder that was there for potentially 8 hours, and wonder how proactive we are as a brigade at going and looking at buildings. Given that I see when it passed that, the amount of heat that must have been in that fire to have twisted the steel structure to the extent that it has, must have considerable storage of combustible materials, and wonder whether there is a proactive visit around factories and storage space to try to give some guidance as to how safe that could be. I suppose if it caused that amount of fire and took that length of time to go out, if you were having to try to rescue someone from that building, thankfully there's no fatalities, but that would have been some task. So wondering what the aspect was to dealing with that, given that we've now had the fire, I think it's in Douglas Street, just off the Lockheed Road, that took forever to put out, and huge contamination of fumes heading into the direction of people's homes.
Thanks, Councillor Keenan. I'll start and then hand over to Graham for some further information. In regards to the fire fatalities, thankfully there are quite few and far between, but we have seen a couple of spates of them over the last few years in the Dundee city area. So yeah, we do, as Graham mentioned earlier on, we do carry out case conferences individually for each one. However, we're also doing part of a multi-agency approach, doing a thematic review of fire fatalities in the Dundee area, and that's something that we've got coming up later on this month with all the partners, including Health and Social Care, Housing, Neighbourhood, Police Scotland, NHS, and the third sector. So that's that multi-agency approach to get around the table and discuss each of the cases individually and see if there's any improvements that we can make as a multi-agency or as individual organisations, or any learning that we can glean from each of the fire fatalities. So yeah, that is underway, and we do have good referral processes in place for any members of the public or anyone that does or would like to refer someone for a home fire safety visit, and that's well advertised on all our social media platforms that we do that. And then also I would add probably that the bit of work that we do following not just any fire fatality, but any significant fire in any of the areas within Dundee, in that our crews will follow that up with what we call hot strikes, and they'll carry out visits in the local area just around and about the neighbouring streets and buildings, just as a form of reassurance as well, just to make people aware of what's happened and the consequences of fire as well. So that's the first part. In regards to the build-up of significant combustibles within buildings, we do have, obviously, we've got our fire safety teams that go out and carry out fire safety inspections on any relevant premises and outlets, and part of that is that they'll look at escape routes and emergency lighting and distances on escape routes in line with the legislation, and they'll enforce force that in premises just to make sure first and foremost that anyone involved in a fire in any of these types of buildings can escape, and there is means there to activate alarms and make people aware of fires. Our operational crews also go out periodically and carry out operational assurance inspections in all these premises, and they would then liaise and engage with occupiers of these buildings, and if they picked up on any significant risk that they felt that should be reduced or posed any risk to those working within those buildings or members of the public visiting those buildings, they would point that out as well. So I suppose that would be the answer to part 2 of your question. And I'll ask Graham if he's got anything else that he would like to add to that.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Gibson. So just really a couple of add-ons there, just in particular then to go back to the fire fatalities. So if you perhaps recall last year, it was organised through the Dundee Adult Protection Committee, where a thematic review of 3 fire fatalities that we'd had in the year at the time, which would have been across the year 19 and into 20, if I recall. So that was concluded last August, and there was obviously recommendations within there. But we are actually having this event, a learning event, at the end of this month. There's 3 different sessions, but I'm actually attending a meeting this Wednesday with our colleagues in the council and also NHS, just to look into these recent fire fatalities, and we talked about the case conferences. So it is right at the centre of our radar just now for obvious reasons. And like I say, as we've just come out of Q1, it is particularly disappointing that, you know, as we've highlighted in the report, that we've had 2 separate fatalities within June itself. So that is, you know, to give that reassurance, Billy Keenan, that is a huge focus of ourselves just now. And again, really just as an add-on, again, you know, you mentioned, you know, because we've highlighted the notable incident back in February this year that we had in Driver Industrial Estate. So it's just exactly as Mr. Gibson highlighted. But again, from a firefighter safety point of view as well, you know, you talked about that must have been a particularly challenging incident to extinguish, along with the one very recently in Douglas Street. You're absolutely correct. They both were. And again, that obviously is specifically focused on what's contained within the building. So as well as our operational crews going out to gain further local knowledge, we will gather all that data, and then we'll upload that as what we class as operational intelligence on our tablets on the fire appliances. So as we turn up to our premises of that particular nature, we can pull up all of that information immediately. So for example, does it contain hazard materials? Yes or no? Okay, what is it? How much is stored within there? Where is it located within the building? And of course, that is a huge focus in terms of firefighter safety when we deploy crews into there to extinguish the fire. But again, you're absolutely right. On the plume of smoke that can go across the city, we had a similar occasion that I was heavily involved in back in May 2020 with the fire at Buldovey. So again, there was a significant plume of smoke, if you recall, that Sunday evening and into the Monday that went across the city. So that is always a huge focus of ourselves. And again, when we're dealing with these incidents, we're linking in with all the different agencies, SEPA, we're getting obviously the latest weather reports in terms of the wind direction, and if it entails that, you know, what's contained within the process of combustion and the smoke, well then we will obviously get that out as quickly as we possibly can in conjunction with our colleagues in Police Scotland to advise the public on the most safety approach to obviously minimise the effects of that. But yeah, thank you for your comments on that. They are particularly challenging incidents to deal with. Again, with the, you know, specifically the Driver Industrial Estate, that the construction of the building, as you state about the steel columns, yes, it doesn't take much for these buildings to be damaged. Again, depending on how they're clad, can have a significant effect on how the fire behaves as well. You may have heard of the term sandwich panels before, again, which is the actual building construction method that's used for the insulation inside. And once the fire gets within these panels, it can be very, very difficult to actually deal with that because it spreads hidden in between the sandwich of the 2 metal sheets. And we do have to adopt a very aggressive firefighting strategy to get into that. So it's a very good point that you make, Mr. Keane. I think you're still on mute, sorry.
Thanks for a very comprehensive answer. It's appreciated.
No problem at all. Thank you.
Billy McPherson. Fraser, you got a question? You're on mute.
Third time today, my apologies. I would first of all say thanks very much to Mr Gibson and Mr Smart for very comprehensive replies to the questions thus far. And my question follows on from what Councillor Flynn and Bailey Keenan have raised in relation to the derelict building side of things. I've had a real concern about Queen Victoria Works in Douglas Street for, quite honestly, the best part of 2 decades. And have repeatedly raised the issues around unauthorised access, site security, and I'm not being critical in any way, shape or form with Scottish Fire and Rescue Service or indeed council officers who have made attempts at various occasions in relation to these issues. And we're well aware that it has proven challenging. I think we know which company owns it, but it has proved challenging to make direct contact with the owners. My question's really around the point at which things are escalated. Now, clearly there are powers of direct action, Building Scotland Act 2003 in relation to, what building standards officers in the council can do. And ultimately, and it doesn't happen often for rather obvious reasons, a local authority can compulsorily purchase a site, and that's happened at one other derelict building in my ward following my repeated requests in previous years, and that was actually quite a potentially successful outcome. So my question really is about escalation. When you've got a building that has caused concerns with repeated unauthorised access, site security over a protracted period, is there a point at which you will be giving advice to, for example, building standards officers about taking further action, because it's quite clear that either engagement with the owners is proving difficult or you're not getting a positive response from the owners? And I was also wondering, given the tyres that were stored within Queen Victoria Works, now this building has been empty since the late 1980s. And obviously that had a real effect on the impact on, for example, the nearby businesses in Douglas Street, roundabout Lower Pleasance, Brook Street and so on, and also the residents of Pleasance Court to the west. And I'm really wondering if you try to obtain access, if you've got a very long-term empty property, does Scottish Fire and Rescue Service, in conjunction in a multi-agency manner, seek to try to gain access to ensure that flammable materials are not being stored within a derelict site?
Sorry, councillor, couldn't get myself off mute quick enough there either. I'll hand back to Graham about the Queen Victoria Works one. I had a very similar situation in my previous role around Strathmartin Hospital, and as you may recall, or you may well know, that there's been issues around Strathmartin for a lot of years with fire raising and antisocial behaviour. And as Graham pointed out earlier, it usually leads to major safety concerns for ourselves when subsequent fires happen there because of the firefighter safety aspect, with holes in floors and poor construction and the subsequent outcomes from the fire. So from our perspective, we're very limited in our powers within derelict buildings. As you say, it's predominantly over to building standards. We can pass on advice, which we do, and we do joint site visits along with our colleagues in Police Scotland and the local authority to try and encourage positive engagement with owners of these types of buildings. So I suppose what I would say, councillor, is it's a lot of the time it's very much down to how willing the owner of the building is to engage with us and take the advice that we are given. But as I say, in regards to legislation and authority for these types of buildings, we're very limited as a fire and rescue service in what we can do and what we can achieve. I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Graham.
No, again, just to really reiterate and provide you with as much reassurance as possible, Mr. McPherson, that like I say, that is a major focus, especially this summer in particular, because we do have obviously a number of derelict buildings that are on our radar. And again, it goes back to the example that we talked earlier about the industrial estate fire up in Dryborough, that yes, again, from that firefighter safety point of view, we absolutely want to know what's in these buildings, where they are, how it's located, and again, if there is an incident there. So we will run through scenarios ourselves internally, but also with our partners there, that, okay, if we do have a significant incident here, what is going to be, you know, our operational tactical plan as to how we're going to approach that. And again, that will also include, with it being a derelict property and the fact that it does attract youths at times. So how do we deal with this incident if we know that we've got reports of unaccounted for youths or other people within that building? Because again, that changes our strategy significantly in terms of how we deal with that, because obviously if we get the intelligence fairly early on or at the outset that we absolutely know that there's no one involved, well, then it is slightly easier in terms of our response to that we don't necessarily have to focus immediately on committing firefighters into that property. But I think Mr. Gibson's probably commented on most of the other aspects of us. And the only other thing that I would actually state to you, that, you know, because you started off your question in terms of the escalation. So it's not really a case at all of waiting until it does get too late. I appreciate your example of, in particular, the open Queen Victoria Works. You're absolutely right. It has been obviously in a derelict state for a number of decades. I used to personally live in Pleasance Court, so I know exactly what you're talking about. However, like I say, we engage at the earliest opportunity and ongoing to try and minimise, obviously, these incidents happening in the first place.
Okay, I'm grateful for that. Obviously, you know, it will be really important, I think, to have a multi-agency approach in terms of taking this particular site forward, because clearly there's an ongoing situation here. What we don't want is a situation where this could reoccur. And I'm grateful for all the efforts that Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and indeed council officers in city development have been putting in relation to that.
On the upside, Strathmartin Hospital's been demolished now. I've been watching it coming down. Next person on the list is Councillor Lynn. So that's Ken.
I think I may be the last. I'll keep it short. I'm just wondering if, as a result of the rocketing price of energy, you think that you're going to face any additional challenges in relation to fire hazards. I'm thinking, for example, of maybe increased use of paraffin heaters, people maybe pulling an electric fire out of a cupboard that hasn't been used for 20 years. I'm also thinking about the large number of tenemental properties that we have in Dundee. I live in one myself, and I've got an open fire, which I've never used and I have no intention of using. But I'm wondering if people might be turning to alternative sources of heating to save money rather than just turning on their central heating. So, yeah, that's my question. Do you think there's any additional risk there? And if so, what actions can be taken to try and mitigate that?
Thanks, Councillor Lynn. Yeah, wholeheartedly agree with what you're talking about there, and it's something that, as an organisation, we're wholeheartedly aware of. The current cost of living crisis is obviously going to lead to people looking for new, not always legal ways, probably as well. Things like bypassing meters, as you say, using different kinds of heating sources, more open fires. So our community action teams are all cited on this, and really what we're doing at the moment is, when we're out doing engagement activities, we're offering, what we're doing is offering advice. So how to safely use these appliances, because we do find that a lot of accidental dwelling fires are caused by items being too close to heat sources, etc., etc. So we do pass on that advice, and things like making sure that you regularly clean chimneys for open fires, and different types of fuel and storage of that fuel. So yeah, that's what we're doing at present, Councillor, just offering advice through our engagement events and activities in regard to that. But yeah, certainly I would say for me it highlights a risk going forward, and it probably is a concern. I would say a concern on where it may lead to and the steps that people may take in desperate times.
Thank you.
And finally, we have Councillor McHugh. Dorothy.
Thank you. It's a question around demographics related to your statistics. I wondered if older people are particularly at risk from accidental dwelling fires. And if they are, is there any specific engagement, with shelter tenants, older people's groups, that kind of thing?
Again, thanks for the question, Councillor McHugh. I'll talk a bit generically and then maybe hand over to Graham for a little bit more of the local context. But yeah, certainly from a national Scottish fire and rescue perspective, we do find that the elderly tend to be the ones that are more involved in accidental dwelling fires due to medical conditions, due to mobility issues, things like that. Along with that, not just older people, it tends to be people under the influence as well. That's kind of probably the two most apparent areas that we find with the numbers within the accidental dwelling fires. And in regards to engagement, Graham may go on to talk about this, but we do target our elderly population through our community engagement activities along with our youths. So we do talks, combined talks and visits out to sheltered housing and homes. And I don't know if there's anything more you want to add locally, Graham?
No, thanks, Mr. Gibson. Again, it's just to really give you that reassurance that it's always ongoing. And when I talked about the local context within the Q4 and Q1 report, and you're absolutely right that in a lot of cases it is elderly people in single occupancy dwellings, and again it's that similar trend that we have identified. And a lot of it is whether it's combustible materials placed too close to an ignition source, and again you also mention about sheltered housing complexes and so on and so forth. So it's that ongoing engagement which is absolutely crucial. It formed part of the thematic review of the fire deaths that we did last year, and again I can give you that reassurance that it's forming part again of our discussions going into the case conferences for the 2 fire deaths from June this year, in particular because there are a lot of similarities just with exactly what you're describing there in your question.
Thank you.
And I'm not seeing any more hands. So I'd like to thank Graham and Scott for coming along tonight and answering all the questions. So thanks. And we'll move on to the next item.
Item 5, contaminated land strategy, site investigation contracts. This is for approval.
The council has a statutory duty to have in place a contaminated land strategy to inspect areas, to identify contaminated land, and if necessary, to ensure that remediation is carried out. This report details the work undertaken in the years 21-22 on the delivery of the strategy and seeks approval to continue the site investigations for remedial works up to the value of £70,000 in this financial year. Progress was halted for a wee while during the COVID-19, and Appendix 1 of this report details the work undertaken and the investigations currently taking place. Tom, do you want to say anything on this report?
Thanks, Convener. No, I think you've explained the purpose of the report. Happy to take any questions.
Are there any questions?
Yes.
Yeah, I've got Bailey Keenan.
Yeah, just for officers to give me an indication of where the former Gallow Hill, Craigie and Baxter quarries are. No, it's not something that I'm aware of.
So these are old quarry sites, I think, to the north of Baxter Park area that has been developed for housing. So these are the titles we've given them relate to their former use that have come up in our desk studies that have led us to look at what further investigation needs to be done. But they are areas that are currently developed for housing.
You couldn't sort of give me a street number that sometimes, so I could just familiarise myself with what was formerly.
I can provide that. I don't have that at my fingertips, Bailey Keenan, but I can provide that to you.
Okay, thanks very much for that.
Any other questions? No. Right, thank you for that, and thanks for your attendance.
Thank you, Convener. The next committee is the Neighbourhood Services Committee.
Thank you, Roger. I would like to welcome people to this meeting of the Neighbourhood Services Committee. Arlene, can you take us to the first item of business?
Yes, thanks, Convener. Item 1, Declaration of Interest. Are there any declarations?
No.
Okay. Item 2, Contract for the treatment of mixed recycling, metals, plastics and cartons. This is for approval.
Thank you, Arlene. The current contract for the treatment of mixed recycling ends next month, and a procurement exercise was undertaken in July. The details are provided on the agenda. Due to the introduction of the deposit return scheme in August 2023, it's proposed that Wiley Recycling Limited Perth be awarded this contract for a period from 1st October this year to 30th September 2023, with the option of the Council extending the contract by an additional 2 years. I'd like to thank the officers for securing a significant tonnage rebate and a 35% contamination allowance. I just want to check if there are any questions. I can't see anyone, so are councillors happy to award this contract as recommended? I see no dissent, so that's agreed. Thank you. Next item.
Item 3, Open Market Acquisition Strategy. You have a report before you.
Thank you, Arlene. This report proposes an expansion in the scope of our open market acquisition strategy. If approved, it delegates powers to the executive directors of neighbourhood services and city development to purchase houses for sale on the open market. This will supplement our strategic housing investment plan by allowing officers to purchase the size and types of houses where we have greater demand. The Scottish Government has provided £89.112 million to increase the supply up to March 2026, and funding of up to £40,000 would be available to support each acquisition. There are a number of key criteria governing the discretion of the discretion that officers can exercise, and these are detailed at 4.4 of the report. The purchases will be funded through the Housing Revenue Account. The property must meet the Scottish Government affordable housing supply conditions and be vacant. A best value assessment will be undertaken, taking into account repair, improvement, purchase and legal costs. The Dundee Federation of Tenants have been consulted during the preparation of this report and agree its contents. Are there any questions? I see no hands or in the chat. Sorry,
Bailey McPherson and Bailey Scott.
Thank you. I'll go into the Bailey McPherson.
Thanks, Convener. It's with regard to, I have no problem with the principle of this. I don't think any of us would do. It's really around what you said in relation to that obviously there's funding up to £40,000 as indicated in 4.2, and I see the criteria in 4.4 about the parameters in which officers can work. However, what I don't see is and what would be very helpful if the director could give some more detail on is the parameter about overall amount spent on one particular property. Quite clearly there becomes a tipping point in value for money between acquisition and new build, and I was really wondering if Mrs. Verlaine could give an indication as to, is there an upper limit in which officers are likely to recommend going ahead with a purchase, given that quite clearly we want to ensure the best value for money for the local authority?
Yeah, I was going to say that we will carry out a base value audit, but I'll let Elaine come in and respond to the question.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Bailey McPherson, for your question. It's difficult to put an upper limit because it really depends on the nature and type and size of the property and the location that we're talking about. But I would like to reassure you that along with our colleagues in City Development, we would be very clear to make sure that we weren't paying over the odds for any particular property or indeed fueling a bidding war. And we would want to make sure absolutely that it was value for money for the housing revenue account, and that would be done in conjunction with guidance from our City Development colleagues.
Okay, I'm grateful for that. I wasn't suggesting for a moment you would ever be paying over the odds. You will make a judgment on that. It's just really that there is clearly a tipping point between whether or not to purchase a property or new build. And I'm grateful for Mrs. Verlaine's clarification of that.
Okay, I'd like to ask Bailey Scott to come in with his question.
Thanks, Convener. And it's to do with the repurchase of former council properties, because the council has a policy of, so long as there's one left in the block, that it has a majority and can compel owners to carry out necessary repairs and maintenance to shared space. And there's a number of properties, and I know there's quite a few in my own ward, where there is no longer council ownership. So if the council, and I'm assuming then, and perhaps I could be advised, that when the council no longer had ownership of a property in the block, that the deeds of condition were extinguished. So if the council now is to own a property in the block, does that mean that the deeds of condition are reapplied?
Thank you for that. Elaine, can you respond on that technical point about the deeds of condition?
Thank you, Bailey Scott. If I can ask Louise Butcher, Head of Housing and Construction, to come in on that point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Elaine, and thank you for the question, Bailey Scott. What we've set out within the report is that it isn't a restriction on the type of property, which includes whether or not it's ex-council or not. What we would look to do is engage with our colleagues in legal services to look at the deeds and conditions prior to purchase and to ascertain if there was any reasons why we wouldn't look to progress with that purchase.
Bailey Scott, does that answer the question?
Yes, it does. Thank you for the moment. Thank you.
We could maybe seek more clarity on that later. Councillor McHugh.
Thank you. I am, of course, in favour of any new proposal that will increase the amount of social rented houses in Dundee, especially considering that the council has missed its own targets for social rented completions every year since 2015-16. I had a number of questions on this report, and I'm grateful to the Head of Housing and Construction Services for her responses today. But even allowing for these, the report raises some questions for me that relate in the main to what's already been alluded to, the best value test, both for the council and for the rent payer. There's nothing in this report that quantifies the proposal in any way, neither in terms of percentage budget allocation nor any indication of implications for the upcoming rent consultation. There's no information on how long the acquisition process will take relative to the new build process, how much the acquisitions might cost per unit compared to a new build, what effect this new proposal will have on the strategic housing investment plan, and there's nothing that says rent payers, who will be funding a significant proportion of the acquisition and associated costs, will be getting the best deal for their money. There are difficult times ahead. Citigroup today forecast that inflation will reach 18.6% in January. House price inflation in Scotland for the year to March 2021 reached 11.7%. Has any account, or will any account, of inflation levels be factored into the strategy? Considering the lack of quantified and costed detail in this report, I suggest we ask officers to bring forward an updated report, including this information, to a future meeting.
Thank you, Councillor McHugh. I mean, this report is basically just extending the scope that officers already have to exercise their discretion. And in the report, and they are acutely aware of many of the factors that you have listed, and will be taking that into account in the best value report. It also is clear in the report that they will come back and report on any action they've undertaken regularly to the committee. But I'll let Elaine come in and see if there's more you would like to add there.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson, and thank you, Councillor McHugh, for your question. We will be bringing back a revised capital plan, which does take into account the inflationary issues that you've highlighted, and indeed we'll be bringing back the strategic housing investment plan as well. As you know, this is reported annually to committee. So through both of those documents, we'll be reporting back on the financial impact of this policy.
Councillor McHugh, do you wish to come back?
Yes, I do. Thank you for that. It's just that the recommendation in this report is to delegate authority to the Executive Director of Neighbourhood Services and Executive Director of City Development to approve appropriate purchases in line with this strategy. Now, I understand you're going to go through a best value process. I understand that you're going to report annually. But this report asks at this stage for delegated authority. So this is the only opportunity that we as elected members would have, to make any real comment on how we see the strategy as it's laid out. So it concerns me that tonight we would give delegated authority, and really there's no comeback on that, because then you've got delegated authority to start purchasing, and we still, as far as I'm concerned, lack some detail in the proposal.
I think it'd like to be clear that we're delegating authority to two extremely senior officers of the council to act with due diligence and provide, and undertake all those exercises. What we're trying to do here is just extend the scope of delegated powers that they already have, so that if there is an opportunity to buy a property that would meet some of the unmet needs, they could use that property, that potential.
I don't want to prolong this, and I absolutely appreciate what you've just said, Heather, and totally agree with you. I have no problem, with Elaine's integrity, in any matter of this kind. It's extending the delegated authority, but it was previously for housing to be adapted for disabled use. This is quite a large extension of that delegation.
Thank you, Councillor McHugh. I think we share your interest and concerns over this, and we will be seeking updates when this happens. So I can reassure the committee that this will be reported back to the committee regularly. Can I bring in Bailey Keenan?
Yeah. Convener, I don't know what we're reporting then, because I don't see the need for a report that seeks approval for officers to go and purchase houses, because I believe that was given in 2020 when the Labour amendment agreed that there should be £6 million laid aside to purchase homes, and that was unanimously accepted by council. So can I ask council officers how many homes that they've purchased from that £6 million, and whether purchased or built new, how many have been built? And in relation to this report and the amount of money that's suggested will be there, how many do we envisage being purchased in the next year? And how many, or how soon will we see the first purchase, given that, it should take around about 8 weeks in conveyancing to build for to buy a house. So, you know, that would be useful to have an information and give an indication. We're not looking to stand in the way of these houses coming into play because we've got 7,000 on a waiting list. But in 2020, we did put forward proposals, and I'm not sure that we've spent anything of that. Another thing that I would suggest, and I would hope it would be unanimously agreed, is that we approach the government, the Scottish government on this, and look for them to rebate the land and valuation tax that we'll spend on this, because we'll potentially spend 5% per property, which is a huge amount of money to be getting money from one hand for the Scottish government to give it back with another. Seems like it's not the best of value for local government. And, you know, the Scottish government are very good at pointing the finger at Westminster and saying, here's a tax that you've taken from us. Could you give it back? Well, I think that we should do the same in local government and ask for this tax back. So I hope that you can agree to that.
Thank you, Bailey Keenan. My understanding is that the previous delegation was around housing for people with, you know, disability needs, but I'll ask for clarification on that now from Elaine.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Bailey Keenan, for your question. Our delegated authority was specifically in relation to adapted properties, so this extends that to cover more general needs properties as well. And we'll be using that in conjunction with the affordable housing programme to supplement the new build that the council undertakes as well. So it would be adding to what the housing associations, our own new build housing programme can deliver on. So this is an additional power that we don't have at this point in time.
Convener, can I come back on that? Because I have the minute of the minute of the meeting that was passed, and it says agree to build or purchase new homes, taking 312k from the Environmental Fund to deliver £6 million worth of capital for that project. So, you know, officers had the delegated power to buy houses that weren't necessarily adapted. It was about increasing the number of houses that were available. But we'll hear what's been spent of that £6 million. If the officers can give an answer to that.
Can I ask Elaine to respond to the question on the number of properties, or whether that's something that you need to come back to Bailey Keenan on?
This is something I'm more than happy to come back to Bailey Keenan on, but we will be bringing forward an updated report on the Strategic Housing Investment Plan to Council in the next few months, so we'll be able to update through that process as well.
Okay.
Convener, do we think there's any purchased at the moment?
I don't.
From that £6 million. Would officers have any indication, because they'll have paid land and value tax?
I'm sorry, I don't have the detail as the new convener, but we can certainly ask that for that question to be notified to you.
I'm happy to look at that, Convener. As I say in my first answer, is that the delegated authority that we had was in relation to adapted properties. The £6 million was directed in through our capital plan for new build, developed through council new build. But we'll update committee on the progress of that when we report back on the SHIP.
Okay. I've got Councillor Shears with the question.
Excuse me, thank you. First of all, could we ask that the information that Kevin's requested be forwarded to all of us, because I think that's very pertinent to all of our wards. Secondly, in paragraph 4.2, it talks about 89 million available from the Scottish Government. How much would we be expecting Dundee to get of that? I'm assuming that is a share across Scotland. But given that's over a lot of council areas and over a lot of years as well, until 2026, it's not a particularly large amount of money. So how much would we actually anticipate our share of that fund to be? And do other councils have similar strategies when it comes to open market acquisitions that would also be looking for quite a substantial chunk of that fund?
Thank you, councillors. Elaine, would you be able to answer the question on the proportion of funding?
Yeah, thank you, convener, and thank you, councillor Shears. The 89 million is in relation to Dundee's share over that period of time, and there are other authorities who have open market acquisition policies in place as well. But I'll ask Louise Butcher to come in and give you a bit more detail around that.
Thanks, Elaine, and thank you, councillor Shears. If I refer you back to the Strategic Housing Investment Plan that went to committee last November, report 302021, what that sets out within the financial implications is the annual allocation to Dundee in terms of the resource planning assumption at local authority level for the Affordable Housing Investment Programme to 2025-2026.
I hope that is helpful. I'd like to bring in Councillor Alexander.
Thanks very much, convener. Yeah, it was just to, I suppose, add a couple of comments to the conversation that we're having. I think we're all very acutely aware of the demand and pressure on the housing market in the city, and we all want to see more council and social housing built within our communities. And I think, as you set out at the start, £90 million of investment over the next 5 years, plus the additional resources that we agreed to cross-party will be utilised. I think we're getting away from the matter before us, which is a tweak to an existing policy. Now, whatever the wider parameters, that will come back. I'm sure Ms Spurlane will correct me if I'm wrong, but usually in November of each year, we consider the Strategic Housing Investment Plan or thereabouts, and that will contain the overarching focus for us as a council and working with our housing associations on that wider approach to getting the most out of social housing in the city. What we're discussing tonight is a minor tweak which gives, I think, officers an additional tool in the toolbox. It's a fairly minor tool that I consider will probably be used infrequently as and when circumstances allow. And we've also got to bear in mind it's as and when properties come up that meet with the requirements set out within the paper and also the requirements of those that are on our waiting list. So I don't fully anticipate that we're going to see hundreds of houses purchased through this scheme, but it gives Elaine and her team the ability to look as and when is appropriate at specific houses in specific areas where we're seeing that demand. And for that, I can see no downside to progressing with the outlined approach that's within this paper, and I'll be supporting yourself, convener.
I see no other questions, so can I take it that we are agreeing from the tenor of the conversation to note the report and delegate authority to the executives, directors of Neighbourhood Services and City Development to approve appropriate purchases within the strategy? That agreed.
Agreed.
Next item, Arlene.
Item 4, take pride in your city. You have a report before you.
I think this is a substantial report. The Take Pride in Your campaign was launched in 2015. It was updated in 2019 and refreshed in 2021. The overall aims of the campaign are to encourage positive behaviour change and improve the city's environment and image as an attractive place to live, work, shop and visit. It continues to be a dynamic campaign, and the report updates the committee on the considerable action taken over the last 2 years despite of COVID-19. The key achievements are listed on pages 13, 14, 15 and 16 of your report. There are many. And page 17 proposes a range of new initiatives which are going to focus on the local environment, recycling, city centre businesses and communications. Appendix 2 of the report details over 120 actions to be completed over the next 24 months. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank the department for all the work they've been doing and the energy and commitment to this campaign that they've demonstrated in this report. The report is for noting and remitting the Executive Director to take forward the action plan as detailed in Appendix 2. Does anyone dissent?
Questions from various members, convener.
Okay, thank you. I think we start with Bailey McPherson.
Thanks, convener. I concur with you about the hard work that officers have put in this, and could I also add the number of volunteers who have undertaken litter picks. You've got all the people in Bonnie Dundee who keep planters lovely, and so on. The volunteers right across the city do an absolutely marvellous job. I bang on about street cleaning rather a lot, and I will try to bite my tongue a little bit on staffing resources in relation to that. But what I would like to highlight is, I think, a very good pilot project that's referred to in 4.3.4 about what was done in the city centre around Reform Street and the adjacent part, the High Street, in partnership with Zero Waste Scotland. But I'd specifically like, I think, obviously the city centre's in Maryfield ward, but I think all of us get city centre related litter complaints from time to time, just by the very fact it is the centre of our city. And I was just really wondering what might be done to move that forward, to increase that, both in other parts of the city centre, and I'm thinking particularly of the Murraygate, but also perhaps in our district shopping centres as well, because I think initiatives like that are extremely helpful, and there's actually some evidence from the outcome of that, with a decrease, and quite a reasonable decrease in litter, that they're very much worth carrying out.
Thank you, Bailey McPherson. Can I ask Mr. Boyle to come in? So there are significant reductions following that pilot. Are there plans to do more?
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Bailey McPherson. The short answer is yes. Convener, as you've set out, there's around about 120 actions within the report. A lot of them are based in and around the city centre. We have been doing a lot of work over the last 12 months in the city centre, as Bailey McPherson alludes to. We plan to do more, and in fact we have been engaging with businesses in the city centre as well. We have a quarterly meeting now set up, which I chair, and that includes representatives of, like, for example, the Wellgate Centre. I think that we have got other plans as well in terms of the town centres out with directly the city centre, and we'll continue to develop and promote more of those initiatives with the community, crucially with the community and local businesses moving forward. Thanks.
That's greatly appreciated, and I'm grateful to Mr. Boyle for his response.
We also had the extremely successful campaign in Linlathen just a week ago, but I'll come to Bailey Scott.
Thanks, Convener. Can I first associate myself with the comments made by Bailey McPherson about the work done by volunteer groups, and I'm thinking in particular in Broadferry of the Friends groups and Broadferry and Bloom and those who take part in the beach cleanups. But my question is regarding fixed penalties, because while education is important in encouraging people to do the right thing in respect of litter and dogpiling and so on, fixed penalties plays a part in that as well. And one of the action points in the report is to increase the number of officers who are able to issue fixed penalties. I just wondered what the number we have at the moment and what you expect to increase that to, and whether we could be given the information about the number of fixed penalties that have been issued so far in this year, or perhaps in the last year, for litter, dogfiling and fly tipping.
Mr. Boyle.
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Bailey Scott. Yeah, there's been a lot of work getting done on this. Recently, there was a day of action, an enforcement day of action in June in the city centre. And in terms of the specific detail you've requested, if you could allow me to come back to you with the specific numbers, we'll do that in due course.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question from Councillor Flynn.
Thanks, Convener. I'd also like to agree with Bailey McPherson and Bailey Scott, and I obviously think about the Friends of the Law, Fairmuir and Durrup in my own ward, who have done fantastic work across the ward itself. And I think this is really take pride in your city, and it's quite clear by the title. It's not just the city centre, it's the city, and I think that should be applauded. Can I just ask, with regards to the 120 actions, Mr. Boyle, can you maybe give us some idea how you're going to actually report this back to the committee in the coming months and within the 2-year period?
Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Councillor Flynn. Yeah, I don't think we've made it clear perhaps in the report
how we're going to do that. So I think that point is well made. I'd be happy to come back and maybe provide an annual update to committee if that was suitable.
I think that would be welcome.
Yeah, I'll agree with that, convener. Thanks very much, and thanks, Mr. Boyle.
Okay, so we'll take a note to report annually. I've all got a question now from Bailey Keenan.
Thanks, convener. First of all, convener, given the sort of press reports that we're seeing in Edinburgh of the industrial action and the effect it's having on Edinburgh as a city, I hope that through COSLA that an agreement can be reached and a suitable wage agreement and settlement comes around fairly quickly, so as that we don't have that level of industrial action within Dundee. I can understand with the increase in inflation and all the rest of it that the unions feel pushed in that direction at the moment. So I've got a bit of sympathy for action that they see that they're needing to take. But hopefully we can get over that without it affecting our city. The community clean-up that was mentioned in Linlathen, I'm wondering how that was publicised and what it was looking to attract. I know that household budgets and everywhere are stretched, and I think that sometimes our bulky uplifts are at a price where people can't afford them, and it leads to more fly tipping across our city. And you know, so I'm wondering if these are to be rolled out, how they'll be rolled out, how we target that. It might be easy to go around the corner and get a hand to go around the corner and dump a settee suite into a skip if that's what we're able to offer. Because if that bulky uplift, if it sits at the back of a tenemental block or someone else as well is looking like an eyesore on the street, then we obviously end up in a position where there's a potential fire risk, and that's you know, something that we shouldn't live beside. So you know, I'm wondering if officers can elaborate on how they'll roll it out, what they've seen for this, what improvements they'd make to that scheme, you know, and you know, what are the target areas next? Because you know, I think every household budget is stretched, and the bulky uplift is too costly.
Thank you, Bailey Keenan. I think we all concur with your hope that there'll be a fair settlement soon, and you know, hopefully if we could avert a strike action on Friday, we would all appreciate that, and everyone's working towards that. In terms of the Linlathen clean-up, I spoke to a number of the community education staff. I think there'd been a lot of leafleting and communicating with households prior to the event, so the people who needed to know knew, and it was a pilot. But I'll allow Mr. Boyle to come in to tell us about the learning from that and what he hopes to do next.
Thanks, convener. Thanks, Bailey Keenan. Yeah, this was very much a pilot initiative, concentrating on Linlathen, which is obviously in the top 10 of Scottish sites of multiple deprivation. It was an obvious candidate from which to embark on the pilot initiative. The idea was to coordinate services, not, you know, on their own, but together in concert with the local community. So there was a lot done for community officers ahead of the event. It took several months to organise so that we didn't just parachute in. We actually worked in a coordinated manner and within the local neighbourhood, and there was no surprises. There's a lot of learnings to come out of this event, but overall it's been overwhelmingly positive. We collected over 20 tonnes of waste over 3 days, and I think Bailey Keenan's point is well made regarding some of the other supplementary issues we've resolved, for example, fire risks in and around buildings. And I can also confirm to Bailey Keenan, yeah, that very much the plan is to roll this out into every neighbourhood. It will take a bit of time. So I'm organising a debrief of officers so that we can get learnings from this exercise. And the aim is to look at, try to roll this out perhaps on a rolling basis throughout the city. It will take time. Can't promise members it will all happen within a short space of time, but we are dedicated towards promoting this and developing this with the community as part of Take Pride for the coming months and years.
Thank you, Tony. And we've got Deputy Provost Curdell. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on the issue of fly tipping, because obviously not all instances occur on land that the council has responsibility over. So I was just wondering, Tony, what steps you're able to take when fly tipping is reported on land that is in private hands, and I see a lot of it in, for instance, industrial estates. So I just wonder if you'd be able to say, you know, if people see instances on private land and they come to us, what steps you're able to take.
Thank you, Deputy Provost. This is a key part of the Take Pride plan, that we don't just look specifically at public sector sites, council sites, that we work in tandem with all aspects of the community, including businesses. We have an environmental compliance team that works under Tom Stirling's side of the business, who are very much part of the working team that look at the Take Pride actions and take them forward. So that's something that they would engage with and do on a regular basis. We get quite a lot, as the Deputy Provost has said, in and around the industrial estates, and that work is ongoing. So be assured, please, that's part of the plan.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see Bailey Roberts would like to come in with a comment. Christina.
I'd like to thank Tony and all the team for the hard work that took place in Lunlathen. It was absolutely brilliant. The amount of people that were out in the street helping each other was absolutely amazing. And we've still got people going out and doing the weeds at the side of the roads and everything. So that's been a really, really positive thing. And neighbours have started speaking again, which is another good thing to see. So the community part of it worked amazingly. The kids were fantastic. Neighbours all helped neighbours, and it was just brilliant to watch. So congratulations to everybody for that. And 20 tonnes of rubbish. Wow, it's a lot.
Yeah, and we're all very jealous, Bailey Roberts. So we're looking forward to the tour going ahead. So I can't see any more questions. I would like us to remit this to the Executive Director to go ahead with the action plan. We will get an update in a year's time, and I'd like to thank all the hundreds of volunteers that will be required to carry out these actions in advance. And thank you for your work. Is that agreed? Thank you. Next item, Arlene.
Item 5, Delivering Scotland's Circular Economy, Proposed Bill and Route Map to 2025 and beyond consultations. This is for approval.
Thank you, Arlene. There are two separate consultation responses included here. The first is to the bill itself, the Circular Economy Bill, and the second is in response to the route map to 2025. You have all the questions with the responses in Appendix 1, and the deadline for submission of each of these consultation responses is today. So we are seeking your approval for the submission of these responses, but I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. Check with Roger, I can't see anyone. So we're good to go. You'll have to do that after the meeting, Tony, to make sure the submissions are approved. Next item.
Item 6, Neighbourhood Services Service Plan 2021 to 24 Annual Progress Report. This is also for approval.
Thank you, Arlene. The report before you is extensive. It details our performance against 11 neighbourhood services priorities detailed in the 2017-22 Council Plan. And these 11 priority areas cover housing, communities, community safety and protection, environment and construction. The report also details actions required as part of the 2017-26 City Plan, the Fairness Commission Action Plan and the COVID-19 Recovery Plan for Neighbourhood Services. There are a great number of achievements. There are over 51 indicators. So I would like to congratulate the staff who worked incredibly hard throughout COVID-19 to achieve what they did. I'm also aware that where we failed to reach our targets, there have been explanations given and other authorities are facing very similar problems. And I'm very clear that recovering from the impact of COVID-19 in these areas is now our key priority. So I'm seeking approval for the action plan, which is detailed originally in pages 75 to 93 in the original report and on pages 7 to 26 on the supplementary report. But I'm happy to take any questions. Now, let me check where I am. I think it's Councillor Crichton first.
Thank you, Convener. Can I just make a comment about Green Flag Award on page 23? It was excellent to see all the Green Flag Awards attained in 21-22 and grateful to the hard work of officers and the many volunteers across the city that achieved this. I was really pleased to see that Riverside Nature Park has now been added and added to the city's Green Flag Awards. And can I highlight and thank the hard work of the Friends of the Riverside Nature Park, whose commitment has been second to none.
Oh, thank you, Councillor Crichton. I found out last week that I was responsible for the cows, so I've been to the Riverside Nature Park rather a lot in the last week, and was also delighted that they got the green flag, but thank you for that. Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Madam Convener. On page 20 of the supplementary report, that is, we see the 21-22 target for percentage of residents satisfied with the cleanliness of streets is just 72%. Is that not a bit of an underwhelming target to have nearly 30% of the public not satisfied with the cleanliness of our streets? Maybe perhaps a little unambitious, and I'd be grateful for feedback of the officers on that, and if there's an intention to raise the bar over time. I know the street cleaning staff do a superb job, but to repeat what my colleague has previously said, there is not required to be an increase in staffing in this area if the city is to achieve a more ambitious target for public satisfaction. I have a number of emails and complaints I get. I wonder if a number of that 30% live in my own ward, because it's a frequent issue I get about the cleanliness of streets, and I know we all are. So I just wondered if there's hopefully an ambition to increase that target.
Live in your ward, you div.
Mr. Boyle, if you'd like to respond to that about increasing the target.
Thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor. Yeah, very much so. But what I would say is that if you bear in mind that the right-hand column of that page, it does confirm that that is a performance target that's originated through consultation through the Local Government Benchmarking Forum. It's a realistic target, but absolutely confirmed that our aspiration is towards something much higher. Thanks, Convener.
Thank you. Yeah, I think throughout this report, our aspirations are higher. We'll always want to raise aspirations. I've now got Councillor Cruikshank, Georgia.
Thank you, Convener. I welcome the latest service plan from Neighbourhood Services, and of course, actions always speak louder than words, and results count for more than rhetoric. But documents like this are always a solid starting point for change and accountability. The 11 goals listed in the report definitely cover pertinent issues which must be addressed citywide, especially as we fight to deal with a wide range of social impacts, not just in the last 2 years, but the last 12, with the brutal effects of austerity, Brexit, COVID, and now a cost of living crisis to boot. Delving into some of the specific presented in the report, I have a couple of questions I'd like officers to answer. I assume that this report does not present an exhaustive list of measures where antisocial behaviour is concerned. I'm sure the committee would agree that noise complaints are by no means the only example of antisocial behaviour in our communities, so it would be good to get an all-round perspective on antisocial behaviour. I'll not cover the second one because Daniel's covered that, about the 72%, but the report mentions that sheltered complexes have reopened and marks this as completed. Is this an accurate representation given the staffing shortage and recruitment challenges for wardens? I'm also concerned by reports across the city that wardens are not always present at complexes for the full hours advertised. I appreciate the work which goes into preparing and eventually executing plans like this. I ask these questions in need of finding a constructive path forward on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cruikshank. Can I go to Elaine first to address the issues around the question around antisocial behaviour approaches and also the question on sheltered housing?
Thank you,
Ward
Convener, and thank you, Councillor Cruikshank. In relation to antisocial behaviour, as you're aware, there's a wider report that comes back to the Community Safety and Public Protection Committee that gives that wider view on the multi-agency work that goes into both dealing with antisocial behaviour and also the preventative work. In addition to that, I think we've run a number of briefing sessions for elected members, and we're happy to continue to do that for ward councillors specifically, just to spend a little bit of time looking at the issues pertaining to particular wards. So if that's something that Councillor Cruikshank would like us to set up, then we're happy to do that in relation to antisocial behaviour. In relation to sheltered housing, we did a comprehensive survey of our tenants following the pandemic and got an overwhelming response and positive response in relation to the work that the sheltered wardens did during the pandemic to support individuals in those complexes. If there is further improvements that we can make, we're more than happy to look at that and happy to involve tenants in that consultation, see if there's any further improvements that we can make. But I'm really like to put on record my thanks to the sheltered wardens in particular for the work that they did during the pandemic to keep our sheltered tenants as safe as possible.
Thank you, Elaine, and I think people would be interested in the briefing on antisocial behaviour.
And I think
can I just respond to Elaine, please? Thanks very much for that explanation. We did get an explanation from Louise at the Housing Best Value Group on Thursday, but I thought for the benefit of the committee that we should be raised, Chair. And I echo your sentiments, Elaine, regarding the sheltered warden tenants. They do a fantastic job, and throughout COVID, the residents were happy with the service that they received in those circumstances. But now we must look forward to the future and see if we can get our complexes back up and fully running as they used to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cruikshank. I have Councillor McHugh, a comment, Dorothy. No.
Yes, thank you. Pages 85 and 89, I have a comment to make. On the first table on page 85, it has a value for 21 years, 21-22, but it says in the notes that the annual citizen survey wasn't conducted in 2020 or 2021. So I just wondered where the value of 98% of residents who felt their neighbourhood was a good place to live came from. I'm assuming it came from 2019. Sorry, that's maybe turning out to be a question. And on page, sorry.
Yeah, no, so seeking clarification on where the data came from. Thank you.
Yes, and a similar question on page 89, the performance indicator, percentage of residents who were satisfied with the natural environment in their neighbourhood, 21-22 value 100%. Now that doesn't reflect my post bag. Certainly doesn't reflect my post bag. So again, where does that number come from?
Okay. Elaine, can I ask you to explain how you gathered the data for these surveys?
I see Mr. Boyle's on the call, so I'm happy for Tony to take that one.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine. Thanks, Convener. Thanks, Councillor McHugh. The target that's mentioned on page 85 at 21-22 target is something that's set every year. And it originates from a time before the pandemic where we would take the feedback we get through the citizens' annual survey and use that to, set ourselves a new target, if that makes any kind of sense. So that was where that came from. Unfortunately, over the last 2 years, the pandemic has interrupted our ability as a council to undertake the citizens' survey, and that's what that's mentioning there, Councillor McHugh, at the right-hand side. And I think that is the same answer to the second part of your question as well. Thanks.
It was actually the values I was questioning, not the targets. The values that are shown for 21-22 in both instances.
Okay, so you're talking about the 98% and 99%.
Yes, 98% on page 85 and 100% on page 89. It's the value that's shown.
Right, so what happens, what would, to fully answer that question, Councillor McHugh, you'd have to have been privy to the previous results of the citizen surveys, and those are indicative of the levels of feedback we were getting in previous surveys. So therefore, I don't have obviously the previous citizen survey to hand, that from which we based those values, but I've got a high degree of confidence that they were in and around that number. We would always try and increase the value of the target based on what the feedback was previously from the citizens survey. So as and when we get the citizen surveys up and running again, or perhaps we could refer even to the previous surveys, that would allow us to inform you where those values came from originally, because it's based on the previous feedback from previous surveys, if that makes sense.
Mr. Boyle, are we assuming that we will be able to go ahead with the survey this year?
I'm probably not best placed to answer that question, convener. I don't know if there's anyone from corporate services who could maybe, who are in the meeting.
I can see Andrea has an answer.
Sorry, just make sure I was off mute there. There isn't a plan at the moment to reinstate the citizen survey. We would have to go out to tender, so there would have to be a process that we'd put in place. It was paused due to the pandemic, so we need to review that and decide what we do going forward.
Okay, so that might be something that we'll be asked to make a decision on. Okay, so given that that's all the questions and comments that I can see, I am basically asking that members are happy to approve the actions as submitted, and we will be updated at numerous points. Thank you very much. And I just also wanted to say that the best value committee meeting we had last week was also extremely useful. Arlene.
Item 7, tenders received by Head of Design and Property. This is for approval.
So as you will see, we're seeking approval for the award of contracts to the specified contractors for 5 different areas of work: restoration work to Camperdown Boundary Wall, the housing concrete repairs programme for 22-23, the retaining wall work and footpath and landscaping improvements at St Kilda Road, window renewals in St Mary's, and the electrical periodic inspecting and testing of 1,500 properties. I am asking for approval to award these tenders as proposed. Is there any dissent? Everyone happy? Thank you. I believe that's our committee. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, convener. The final committee this evening is the Policy and Resources Committee.
Good evening, folks. Welcome to Policy and Resources. Before I pass over to officers to talk us through the agenda, I'm going to suggest that, given that we've been going for 2 hours and 36 minutes, that we have a quick 10-minute recess to allow folk to go to the toilet, etc. Charlie's shaking his head, but everybody else is giving thumbs up. So, Charlie, you're overruled, I'm afraid. So we will reconvene at 7:47. Thanks, everyone. And it is now 7:47, so I'm going to stick to my word and we will proceed with the committee, and hopefully those that aren't back will join us in the next few seconds. Willie, hoping you're back.
I am indeed, thanks very much.
Good.
Okay, item 1 before you, conveners, declaration of interest. Are there any declaration of interest from membership?
So I see nobody rushing to the keyboard, so we'll take that as a no.
Okay, thanks very much. That takes you on to item 2 then, which is minutes. And you have before you the minute of the Pension Subcommittee and Pension Board of 27th of June, and also the minutes of recess subcommittees of 6th of July and 1st of August, all 3 of which are for noting.
Any questions, comments on these? No. Can I take that as agreed? Thank you very much.
Okay, that then takes you on to item 3, the fair tax declaration. This item has been placed on the agenda at the request of Councillor Duncan.
I'm always very pleased when I don't have to talk so much during the process of P&R, so I'll hand straight over to yourself, Craig. Over to you, Councillor Duncan.
Okay, fair enough, convener. I'll do a wee bit of talking. To save a bit of time, can I ask the officers circulate my motion, please, whilst I speak to it, if that's okay?
Yep, we'll get that done. Thank you.
Okay, I mean, I think this is against the background, we've talked about it tonight in previous way of, cost of living crisis, and, one shudders to think what the future holds really in many ways. And in fairness, any government, local, national or whatever, actually needs money to try and alleviate the situation. And yes, they can borrow, but I think taxation is also one of the prime methods of raising money. And against that background, I'm hoping that colleagues might consider this an uncontroversial motion, which simply seeks, in brief, to have this council set a good example of an organisation that pays its fair share of taxes, doesn't indulge in any kind of loopholes, tax avoidance type schemes, and we would not be by any means the first council to be signing up to this fair tax declaration, which is promoted by the Fair Tax Foundation. For example, South Lanarkshire Council some weeks ago became the 21st local authority to sign up to it. So the council's for fair tax declaration would commit the council to exemplary tax conduct. In other words, to lead by example in its own affairs. And I would hope that every elected member would agree that that has in principle and indeed in practice always been the case with Dundee City Council anyway. It really boils down to transparency from ourselves, our suppliers, calling for more meaningful towers to tackle tax avoidance amongst supplier businesses. Obviously, the council, can act with good conduct itself, but I think we have to be mindful that, the sort of people that, frankly, we do business with, and we should be trying our best to ensure that they are not indulging in the, doubtful schemes, shall we say. So in brief, I'd like to have the council approve the council's for fair tax declaration, lead by example and demonstrate good practice in our tax conduct right across our activities, including encouraging contractors to implement IR35 the burseway and pay a fair share of employment taxes. I would briefly explain to colleagues that IR35 is a rule around how can I explain it simplistically? If you have staff who, in other words, in every aspect are treated like employees, you should in fact treat them like employees in terms of paying tax and not allow them to indulge in, self-employment vehicles or anything like that. I don't think this council would like to be associated with that kind of sharp practice. We should be discouraging the use insofar as we can of offshore vehicles for the purchase of land and property, especially where this leads to reduced payments of stamp duty. We should also discourage the use of not-for-profit structures where those are used in an inappropriate way as an artificial device to reduce the payment of tax and business rates. What we should do is to encourage clarity on the ultimate beneficial ownership of suppliers and their consolidated profit and loss position, given a lack of clarity could be strong indicators of poor financial probity and weak financial standing. The rest of it you can see for yourselves. It's just about promoting the Fair Tax Mark certification for any business, join and support in Fair Tax Week events. I don't think there's anything controversial about that. And also to support calls for urgent reform. And I would emphasise urgent reform of insofar as we can of EU, UK and Scots law to enable municipalities to revise their procurement policies and better penalise poor tax conduct and reward good tax conduct. So that's it in brief, and I shall stop there and just put my colleague Michael Triton on the spot and say that he will second me.
Well, before you do that, I shall convene the meeting and just say that I don't think you'll need a seconder, because I think, as you've rightly said, what's contained within the motion is, in the words of one Bailey McPherson, eminently sensible, and I think it's incredibly important that we are seen and practising the best practice in this area as well. So I don't think you'll need a seconder, but I will invite Councillor Crichton to come in any event. Michael?
Thanks, Convener.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, I'm more than happy to second Councillor Duncan. By signing up to the Council's fair tax declaration, the Council would just be confirming practice and responsible tax behaviour that the Council has always striven to achieve. We should be promoting fair tax mark certification for any business which has a significant stake and where corporate tax is due. The pledge includes a commitment to join in and support fair tax weeks in the area and celebrate the tax contribution made by responsible businesses who say they pay with pride. We should and we will be signing the pledge by calling for urgent reform of UK and Scots law to enable local authorities to better penalise poor tax conduct and reward good tax conduct through their procurement policies. If we approve this tonight, Dundee would join another 21 councils who have already signed up to the declaration, and I hope the committee can agree to do so. Thank you very much, Convener.
Thank you very much for your brevity. Yeah, absolutely. I don't think anybody's going to disagree with this, but I'll just open it up for any comments or notes of dissension, of which there is none. So can I take this item as agreed?
Oh, sorry, Convener.
Bailey Keenan and Bailey Scott.
Sorry,
Convener.
apologies, Bailey Keenan.
No problem. They're
not
gratefully accepted. I would hope that in Councillor Duncan bringing this forward, he didn't think that there is anything untoward in relation to the council's own tax affairs, because I think that we, as councillors, if there is anything, I would hope that officers would bring that forward. I think we have a duty to make sure that the council's own tax affairs, given that the majority of the funding that we get is from the public purse, and directly from the public, it is a duty upon us to do the right thing. And then looking further than that to ensure that we deal with individual companies that pay their tax, then I have no problem whatsoever in supporting it. But, and again, I would hope that there is nothing untoward in relation to our own tax affairs. And I'm sure that would be the case given the quality of officers that we've got.
Thanks, Bailey Keenan. I'll allow Councillor Duncan to come in a couple of moments, but I think he did make explicit reference to the fact that he does believe that Dundee City Council adheres to the highest standards in terms of tax. So I think we can take that as read. But thank you very much for your contribution. I'll come to Bailey Scott next.
I'm supportive of what's been proposed. I think corporate bodies should be transparent in their tax affairs and contribute fairly to society by paying the appropriate rate of tax in the jurisdiction that they're operating in. And I take it that officers now will ensure that this fair tax policy is incorporated into our various policies, such as procurement and fairness policy and the community wealth building policy when it comes forward.
Yep, thank you very much. You can take that as read. Obviously, once agreed, it becomes the policy of the council, and we'll look to ensure that that is consistent across the board in terms of the approach that's taken. So thank you for that. Councillor Scott, I don't know if I really need to come back to you unless it was just the point that I've clarified with Bailey Keenan.
Yeah, I think you mean me, Convener.
Thank you very much. Grand.
Yeah, no. I couldn't let that comment pass without personally rebutting it. I'm glad that you did so on my behalf. At no point did I suggest that the tax affairs of this council are in any way inappropriately handled, and indeed I made that point, and I'm glad that you picked that up.
You'll need to listen. There was nothing intended to you.
Well, I'm just making it clear, Bailey Keenan.
Okay, thank you very much for all of the contributions. Now, I think I'm correct in saying this time that there are no other contributions, so can I take this as agreed, please? Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on.
Okay, thank you very much. Convener, item 4 then before these asylum seekers, and this item has been placed on the agenda at the request of Councillor El Nakla.
Again, I'll pass straight over to Councillor El Nakla to talk to this motion. Nadia.
Thank you. Thanks. Yeah, can I just ask as well that the motion is circulated to everyone so that you'd have it in front of you. It is a full page. I will not read out the whole thing, but I'll just take snippets from it and talk about those that are fleeing violence and persecution and war. They're risking their lives to cross the English Channel to find safety. And when the sea becomes safer than the land, it only highlights the true distress that is facing these families. There's not a situation anyone should ever have to experience, and I really can't imagine the harrowing decision of deciding to put your children in rubber dinghies to cross the sea with the sheer hope of finding safety. And I do hope that none of us are ever in this situation. But I can tell you that if I was in this situation, I had to make the heartbreaking decision to leave my home and to put myself at such risk of drowning at sea, I would hope that if I survived that journey, that I'd be welcomed with kindness and compassion. Expelling our asylum seekers to another country, such as Rwanda, which is the policy of the UK government being put forward at the moment, a country which has a track record of serious human rights violations, including repression of free speech and torture, it just sends such a horrendous message to those across the globe, to be honest, that the UK is willing to subject the most vulnerable and traumatised people in the world to cruelty and violence at the hands of another country. Therefore, I reject this policy. And more so, it comes against the backdrop of maybe a decade or so of increasing hostility towards refugees and asylum seekers in the UK. Therefore, I believe that there 100% needs to be action to stop those most vulnerable drowning in the English Channel. However, I don't believe that this policy will do that. Therefore, I asked the council, as a collective, could we make a public gesture to show that Dundee is a city that welcomes and values refugees, alongside asking the chief exec of the council to write to the UK government expressing our collective concern. That's it.
Sorry, I was struggling to get myself off mute
Sorry.
there. Sorry for the awkward pause at the end there, Nadia. Thank you very much for that. Wholeheartedly endorse everything that you're saying. I think our experience as a city over decades prior to both of us even being born is that Dundee is a very welcoming place. Looks to support people who, for whatever circumstance in whatever part of the world, who are in a dire situation or certainly less fortunate than ourselves, that we play an active role in supporting them in any way that we possibly can. So I think it's really important that we, again, continue to put that marker down to say Dundee is a city that is proactive in showing that support, whether that be through the work that we've done recently, for example, with Syrian refugees or more recently Ukrainian refugees. It's really important that that solidarity between Dundee and people, as I say, who are less fortunate than ourselves, continues. And again, this is an important marker. I'll bring in other contributions. So I can see that I think Councillor Malone was next, according to my list. Charlie?
Yeah, I don't intend to go on for too long. Just reiterate the comments that have been made, but also the importance of the contribution that's been made through this paper. I think that, you know, as a city, you're quite right, John. One of the things that impresses, what I'm proudest about when I speak to students from all over the world, is how welcoming they find Dundee. And actually, if you look at Dundee's history has been shaped by people who came from other parts of the world, whether it was to escape, you know, the horrific circumstances that we find in Iraq and Afghanistan about wars and the deterioration of societies there, or whether it was the Irish people coming here because of hunger in the 19th century. I think we all are proud that our welcoming attitude has helped shape the city. But on the Rwanda point in particular, I think that this is probably the most despicable and dishonest policy that any British government has enacted. To suggest that if you're against the policy of shipping people who've been through trauma and crisis to Rwanda puts you on the same side as the human traffickers, I find absolutely disgusting in that kind of moral, that type of moralising. And also, you could actually go to find information on Rwanda is not that difficult. It's an economically illiterate policy that's being proposed, but you only have to go. There's plenty of information that talks about human rights abuses in that area, and including the US Department of State, that talks about the unlawful killings, the unlawful detention, the abuse of human rights groups in Rwanda. There is nothing about this policy that has any legitimacy. It won't stop the trafficking. And Nadia made the point, if faced with those circumstances, that she would do the same thing. But she would want to arrive someplace where she felt free from persecution and ongoing persecution on a policy that's designed, and let's be honest about this policy, is designed to send noises to a specific constituency group of political people. And it's not got anything to do with humanity. The people who are putting these proposals forward have demonstrated they're devoid of humanity. So I'd like to support the discussion that's been held. I think it's absolutely disgraceful, but it's a very timely intervention, Nadia. So I'm glad you brought that motion to the table this evening.
Thanks very much, Councillor Malone. Absolutely agree with you. I think all the words that you used, particularly around just the shameful approach that's been taken, is absolutely right. And this is fundamentally a question of morality or humanity, as you describe. And if we can go home at night knowing that this is the policy and not say something about that, then again, you know, there is a judgment to be made. This is a wolf whistle to a very small minority in this country who happen, you know, to be appeased, I think, somewhat by this policy, and it's shameful, absolutely shameful. So anyway, I will bring in other members. Bill McPherson.
Thanks, convener. And there have been eloquent contributions already, and I'm grateful to Councillor El Natla for bringing that forward. And you know, as you and she know, my group was happy to support the letter that was originally sent from, if you like, politicians to the Home Secretary, and I see a lot of merit in the Chief Executive also writing on behalf of the whole Council in relation to this. In my lifetime, this is one of, in my opinion, one of the worst, most dreadful, horriblest, for want of a better word, policies that I think I've ever come across. And others, Councillor Natla, yourself, convener, Councillor Malone, have touched on the human perspective, the humanity or the lack of humanity in such a policy. But there's also the other aspect, which is it makes no financial sense whatsoever. Millions have been shelled out to the Rwandan government. How many people have actually gone to Rwanda thus far? Nil. And I think the Rwandan government itself has already put up the barriers in relation to how many would go. Let's hope the answer to that is nobody. Because you know, in what is one of the worst policies in my lifetime, I think a clear message should be sent. And I think it's a clear message from the whole of Dundee saying that this policy is abhorrent and that we should have no truck with it whatsoever. Thank you, convener.
Thanks very much for your comments. Billy Scott, I can see you've got an amendment, but I'm very conscious, I suppose, that I've not asked for a seconder yet for the motion. So if you'll bear with me a moment, I'm going to come to Councillor Toland, who I believe will be seconding the motion, and then I'll come back to your amendment. Siobhan?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, very, very proud to be seconding this motion, actually. And I'm just going to agree with pretty much everything that everybody said. Just maybe a couple of other points. I think that there comes a time, I think, where there has to be lines of morality and lines of ethics. And this is where the line has to be marked right now, because this is, as Bailey McPherson says, it really is an abhorrent law. And even if Rwanda was a half-decent country with half-decent human rights, we should not be farming out vulnerable asylum seekers and refugees as if they're cattle, because that is exactly, I think, what this law is telling the people that are arriving here, that they can be farmed out to anywhere that the government sees fit, as long as they're not on our doorstep. And I think it's important to maybe say as well, do you know what? They're welcome here. Absolutely welcome here in any shape or form, because they're our neighbours, they're our fellow human beings, and they're people traumatised and in need. And I'm just going to make one final point. I think that it would be really, really wonderful if every single person in this group approved this motion and we had a unanimous support for it to make the message loud and clear. Very happy to second the motion.
Thank you very much. Bailey Scott will come to you next. Got an amendment?
My amendment's pretty straightforward, convener. I'm just going to move the direct negative that we don't write to the Home Secretary. And I agree with an awful lot that's been said. But I think the whole point of this policy is to end the misery that those people face who are subject to human trafficking and the deaths that occur because of it. The Rwanda Migration and Economic Development Partnership is intended to stop the serious organised crime and the human trafficking that occurs. The UK needs to support those fleeing oppression, persecution and tyranny through safe and legal routes while controlling our borders and deterring illegal entry. And that's what the pilot Rwandan scheme aims to do. In recent years, as you say, convener, the UK has welcomed tens of thousands of refugees from Syria, Afghanistan and Ukraine, and those with British national overseas visas from Hong Kong. And the presence of economic migrants, which these illegal routes introduce into the asylum system, inhibits the ability to support those in need of protection. And my concern about this motion and the letter when it was first sent out to us is that it conflates the two issues of refugees and migrants, and blurring the two terms takes attention away from the specific legal protections refugees require. So I would say that we don't write to the Home Secretary, but I'm aware that I won't have a seconder, so I'll ask for my dissent to be recorded.
Well, I'll check first as per the procedure, so can I check if there is a seconder? There isn't one. I'll bring in Roger.
Thank you, Convener. Just to confirm, as Bailey Scott has indicated, that given his amendment does not find a seconder, it cannot be put to the meeting, but his dissent can be recorded in the minutes.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification, Roger. I'll come on to, I can see Councillor Short and Bailey Keenan. So Councillor Short first.
First of all, aren't we glad there's no seconder for that? Shame on you, Bailey Scott, for those words. Totally takes away from this united council that we have here. And I just wanted to go back to Councillor Malone's point about various peoples who have come to the city of Dundee and changed the face of it. And I'd like to remind everybody of those who came from Uganda, from Pretty, who was the Secretary of Dundee United, to the Ochais who gave us Merrymate, to my own family who have stood and defended people as solicitors in the city. The Ugandan people have been incredible in Dundee, and I think we shouldn't lose the irony of the fact that Pretty Patel, yes, did come originally from Uganda, and so I wonder how she would feel if she was listening in now, just to understand the feeling around today about that policy and an impact that it's having, and basically the shame it puts upon us in this city, because this is not the kind of city that we are. And for me, there's one way out of it, and it'll be no surprise to anybody around the table that that is independence from this puerile, disgusting government that is in Westminster. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Short. I'll bring in Bailey Keenan.
Yeah, just to say that we, as the Labour Group, will be obviously supporting the motion that's put forward by Councillor El Nakla. I think it's really important that we note to the UK government that we are appalled by the policy that they've brought forward. You know, I was tempted to back Bailey Scott a bit from the point of view, a little point writing to the Minister at the moment, given that there's likely to be a new one in a couple of weeks' time as they reshape the Tory party. But however, you know, I think it's appalling if it's around about addressing the issue of human traffickers, then the need to work in partnership to address that better than sending the vulnerable individuals out the country or attempting to send them out the country for someone else to deal with a problem that we should deal with ourselves. I don't see it as any kind of slur on Dundee whatsoever. It's a slur on the UK government for what they're doing. You know, the people of Dundee are decent people. People of Scotland are decent people, and for that, the people in the UK are decent people. We just happen to have the wrong people at the top at the moment, making the wrong decisions and spending the wrong kind of money, especially in a crisis where we're in a crisis and they're spending millions trying to seek a partner for to deal with an issue that they should deal with here. So we'll be supporting your motion, and thanks for bringing it forward.
Thanks very much for your contribution, Bailey Keenan. I would endorse everything that you said. Far from ending misery, all it does is create a new misery. And I will defer at this point to Councillor El Nakla for any comments in terms of summing up.
Thank you everyone for the support. Bailey Scott, I can just say that I was not conflating anything. These are human beings. It doesn't matter if you want to give them the title of asylum seeker, depending on their paperwork, or immigrant or migrant or whatever you want to call them. They're human beings, and like I say, when the sea is safer than the land, you have to question the distress. Talking about human trafficking, it would actually just make the UK government one of the biggest human traffickers in the world then, because Rwanda, you send a gay black man to Rwanda, what do you think will happen to him? So the whole issue, I actually thought the first time I ever saw it was a sick joke, and the fact actually got to the point where a flight was waiting for people to board, and then the absolute stupidity that nobody was actually available and how much it cost is just, it just brings so many different things into question, but ethics is the main one. And yeah, I do believe that everyone, as everyone has said here, deserves a safe passage, and I cannot believe that the UK government cannot bring up a better policy that ensures safety but also legal entry into this country. So no one is saying that everyone should be given a passport and should be given certain rights. What we're saying is that they should not be drowning in the English Channel, and they should be coming to this country and be welcomed for the trauma that they have faced and for the fact that they're human beings. As human beings, we belong where we are. Land belongs to no man, and this land will stand here longer than we ever will. So you not have ownership of that. So I will end it with that. Thank you all for your support on the motion.
Thank you very much for that. And given that I've heard no other dissenting voices and the amendments failed, can I take this item as agreed? Thank you very much. Okay, Willie, we'll move on to the next item, please.
Thanks very much. Item 5, then, before you Pure Well Dundee, that's to agree the recommendations.
Another really important item on the P&R agenda this evening. Obviously, this follows the previous update that we had to committee that set out the intentions in terms of the support that would be made available to citizens within the city. And you'll recall that at the previous committee, we agreed to support our food banks and larders and other organisations providing that kind of support, as well as setting out our intention to bring forward proposals for a Fuel Wells 3, which will provide benefit to those that require it at their time of need. Now, I don't think any of us should be in a position where we think this is going to solve any of the problems facing citizens in the city, and clearly this is somewhat a sticking plaster, but it is an important sticking plaster, and it's a resource that we have at our disposal that we can make available to the citizens of Dundee right now, and that is what this report sets out. Can I also take the opportunity just to thank all of the officers and staff who have been working on the detail of this, working with other organisations and agencies across the city to provide advice as well as direct support, not just now, but over the last year plus. And I think if you look at the experience of the Fuel Well 1 and 2 schemes, they were a great success in terms of the delivery of those and the support that was deployed. There is always more need, and I think we are acutely aware, particularly as we approach October, that prices will continue to escalate. The challenges facing citizens of this city will continue to escalate, and more needs to be done nationally to support people in Dundee. I did share a letter with you. I was very disappointed that it took 7 months to receive a reply, but nonetheless, I did receive a reply. I think we need to keep continuing to push very hard at both a UK and Scottish level to ensure that we have as much resource as we possibly can to support the citizens of Dundee right now. Now, this is just one aspect of the cost of living crisis. What we are deploying here in terms of what's detailed within the report is, as I've described, a drop in the ocean. It's around £800,000 of support, which will be utilised. I think importantly, given the numbers that are within each of the headings, approximately 11,000 residents in Dundee will benefit if this is agreed this evening. That's a significant proportion of the population, but it's also what follows thereafter. It's not just about this support, but hopefully we will be in a position to offer more advice, more support, potentially open other avenues for conversations, and our benefit advice staff are fantastic. And should, and I hope, more resource become available, we have the means to deploy that quickly in a way that is secure and gets to the people that need it. So with all of that said, I will open it up for comments and questions. So forgive me, I'm just going to go back. I think the first person was Bailey McPherson. Correct me if I'm wrong, Fraser.
That's correct, convener. Thank you, and I agree with what you had to say there. I mean, in relation to sticking plaster and the need for greater resource from Scottish and UK governments, the bottom line is this is a help, but it doesn't really touch the sides in relation to what is really required. What and I concur with your point about the efforts that staff have made to try to, frankly, make best use of the resource available. My question really is around the bullet points at 4.6 in relation to eligibility. It's not the first two, which are about single and couple households who are of state retirement pension age. It's really about the last two and those who received a Fuel Well 2 payment. I was wondering, and I think the numbers of this might be remarkably small, but that's only a guess on my part. I'm just very conscious of the fact about hard to reach households. My concern is that a household that would have qualified for Fuel Well 2 but did not apply may seek to apply for Fuel Well 3. But if we go by the criteria that is there, they would not be granted a payment. And I was just really wondering if there is any scope for a bit of flexibility were that situation to come, present itself within the funding for the hopefully relatively small number of people who would have qualified for Fuel Well 2, would qualify for Fuel Well 3, were it not for the fact they didn't apply for Fuel Well 2. And I was just really wondering if officers could clarify that, please.
I'm happy to ask officers to come in and clarify. I'm trying to see who's on the call. Best going to Jackie Capel. If you're on the call, Jackie, can I bring you in?
Yes, yeah, thank you, convener, and thank you, Bailey McPherson, for your question. When we were looking at the figures and looking to develop the Fuel Well 3 scheme, we recognised that there will be a small percentage that won't reapply this year. So there will be scope within that initial 800,000 for those that didn't apply last year and to reapply or to newly apply for Fuel Well 3. In addition to that, the original 800,000, what we're asking the committee to approve is an additional 260,000 of the discretionary funding that was set aside at the previous committee. And of that 260,000, we will open up a further scheme later in the year for new applicants at that time. And that will include new applicants that are on means tested benefit, but also those that are just missing out on the means tested benefit status.
Thanks very much for that, Jackie. That's a really helpful response. I'm very grateful to you for that, and it provides the reassurance I was looking for. So thank you for that.
Great, thank you very much. I think it's Councillor Shears. Pete, over to you.
Thank you. My question refers to the rest of the 160,000. I see that a lot has been put aside for individual households now, as well as food banks. There is talk this winter of so-called warm banks that allow people to come into a heated room, have a cup of tea. However, that would be people that can't afford to fuel their homes, even with this additional payment that they are getting. Would there be funding available to charities, societies, anyone that was thinking of setting up one of these warm banks over the winter, or would this purely be targeted towards individual households?
Thanks very much for the question. I'll start the answer and then I'll bring in the Chief Executive. So this is a topic of conversation that has been raised through the Fairness Leadership Panel, which of course myself and Councillor Short and Councillor Cruikshank represent the Council on. It's been raised in a multitude of conversations thereafter as well. So most recently in a conversation including Leisure and Culture Dundee in terms of looking at the provision of assets. If we look at sports facilities, we look at library footprint, as well as council buildings such as community centres. And it was also raised on a call this morning with the University of Dundee, looking at how they can support the initiatives in terms of what footprint they have within the city centre area. So there are lots of partners within the city that we're coordinating that conversation with. It won't necessarily always be about additional funding, because of course these buildings are open, but if they have to extend their hours of operation, that might be a consideration. So I think we're actively in pursuit of that conversation to make sure as the winter approaches us, we're not in a position where we're reacting to a situation, but very much being proactive in our preparations for those, as you described, kind of cosy spaces. But I'll bring in the Chief Executive, Greg.
Thanks, convener, and thanks, Councillor Shears, for your question. The committee report seeking delegated authority to allow me to prove use of the 160,000, and given that it would be to support food and fuel, then I would say that the example you've given could qualify for that funding. What Councillor Alexander has outlined is we're trying to ensure there's a coordinated approach across Dundee and through organisations, so that what we don't have is individual organisations potentially opening up their doors, but that we've got pockets in one part of the city. What we're looking for is potentially one organisation to lead the work, so that we can ensure there is a spread of places for people to go during what will be a difficult winter. So at this point, we will look to see if there is a way to allocate some funding should it be needed. But I would just stress that there are pressures forming not just on fuel, but also on food, as the report notes. But we will try to allocate that 160k in the best possible way to maximise the use of that to support as many citizens as we can. Hopefully that's helpful, convener.
Thanks very much, Greg. And I think importantly, and perhaps this goes to the point as well, once we're in a position to report back on that wider approach across city partners, then we'll make sure that all elected members are appraised of that, because I think it's really important as voices within the community that you're able to articulate where people can go to access that support as well. So we'll make sure that's done. Okay, Councillor Short, you're next on my list.
Thank you, convener. I'm actually not sure whether I want to be incredibly sad or very, very angry. I think this is just ridiculous that we even have to contemplate these kind of measures. We're an incredibly rich country, and we can see right across this country so much pain. We used to have discussions about whether people would heat or eat. Now we're discussing how we're going to heat. Where is the eating? It's just beggars belief that actually this can all be solved by just having different types of policies that do not give the money to the rich 1% or send the money off to some tax haven overseas. Actually look after the people that you're supposed to look after. I've said this often and I'll say it again. We should be looking to our Scandinavian sisters, and we have, when we look at things like the Scottish Social Security, the baby box, we're even looking at with regards to education. We are looking on these areas, but let's look a little bit closely about what they're doing to us down south. We cannot continue like this as a country to have these things constantly being mitigated. What could we do with all the money that goes towards the Scottish Welfare Fund? All these mitigations, almost £2 million has gone into feeding the most vulnerable in our city. And the problem is, for many of us, actually, full poverty is not new. As a single parent, I've lived with that for the last 20 years. But what's happening now is it's impacting more and more and more people in this city. And it is a disgrace. And again, the only thing we can do is talk to people and try and get them the support that we can. But I have big fears. And I know that this winter is going to be an incredible bad winter of discontent, and I can only thank all the people who are going out the way to make it as good as possible for people. But again, anybody who assigns themselves with this Tory government should hang their head in shame, because it's an absolute disgrace. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Short. I can see Billy Dawson. I'll defer to you in your point of order.
Yeah, convener, just given the time of night and whether our committee would suspend the relevant standing order to allow business to commence, considering there is only 4 items left on your agenda.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think this is this and the revenue item is probably the most substantive items, but I would certainly endorse that. Suspend standing orders. Can we agree on this?
Agree on this occasion.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go back to the comments and the questions that I've got listed. Can I just say as well, I think that last contribution, just to say, I think it's really important to, in stark contrast, I suppose, to what we're discussing tonight, how appalling it has been to see the news headlines as we've seen rolling in day after day, record-breaking profits for the largest energy companies in this country that were all privatised and are now reaping the rewards, whilst the rest of the country languishes dealing with extortionate prices, which are continuing to escalate as a result of incompetence, as far as I'm concerned, by Ofgem. But that's by the by. I will bring in Councillor Cruikshank.
Thank you, Convener. The financial interventions offered by the Fuel Well Plan cannot come at a more urgent or suitable time to our most vulnerable citizens. Not only will it be a tough time for those already struggling, it likewise threatens to pull people into poverty who were previously above the breadline. A fuel cap which could rise to nearly £6,000 by next spring is no cap at all, which is why I'm glad the Labour Party policy at the UK level is to freeze the cap, tax strip off energy firms and support the people. Food and fuel are two of the most fundamental expenditures of any household budget, with costs inflating through the roof, but with wages failing to keep up, financial support is urgently needed. I too was at the Fairness Leadership panel on Thursday, and within our group we discussed disability, in particular disabled families looking after loved ones who possibly could be running a hospital bed at home, and these families will be impacted as well. And what I'm asking is, can the Chief Executive please reassure councillors that these families will be a priority to receive assistance from the Fuel Well scheme, if indeed needed. We've seen reports in the media, on the television, about families with disabled children not being able to meet the demands. And I think this is a fundamental part that is missing from the Fuel Well strategy. We have the set out criteria, but disability is not mentioned in any of it. And that's why I'm raising it here tonight, to see if the Chief Executive would consider having this within the Fuel Well strategy. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your question. I'll bring in the Chief Executive to respond initially. You might want to bring Jackie in as well, but Greg.
Thanks, Convener. I think it would be helpful just to hear from Jackie Capel and Councillor Cruikshank just in terms of how the team are intending to operate the scheme, and whether or not Jackie can outline any provision that could be put in place to support the different criteria and disabled people that you mentioned. So if you're agreeable, Convener, if I can bring in Jackie just to outline how that could be dealt with via the scheme.
Yeah, absolutely. Jackie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Convener, and thank you, Councillor Cruikshank, and thank you, Greg. Yeah, you're right, Councillor Cruikshank. The Fuel Well 3 policy doesn't mention anything specifically around disabled individuals. What we have tried to assure is those that are in receipt of council tax reduction and those that are of state pension age will receive a Fuel Well payment. We have gone out to partners to share information around the Fuel Well scheme, and anyone with a disability benefit will obviously be encouraged to apply, but we haven't specifically targeted any specific groups with a disability. Certainly from the applications that we receive, we can certainly look to see if we can prioritise anyone. We do ask questions around disabilities to make sure that individuals are claiming all the necessary benefits, and we can certainly look to see what we can do around that area.
Thanks very much for that response, Jackie. I've got Councillor Lynn next.
Thank you, Convener. My question actually has already been asked by Councillor Shears, and I'm pleased that the Chief Exec will take the creation of modern spaces into consideration when it comes to dispensing these discretionary funds. I think this is actually the biggest issue that we as a council or as a city or as a country have faced in generations, not even decades. I can remember the 1970s when the telly went off at 10:30 and we had power cuts for a couple of hours. it's nothing compared to this. A couple of weeks ago, they were predicting 4,000 cap, then it was 5,000, then it was 6,000, as Councillor Cruikshank has said. What's it going to be next? 7,000, a £7,000 cap? I mean, these kind of figures are plunging 80% of the Scottish population into energy poverty. And, you know, not so long ago, it would have been a dystopian vision of the future that saw our citizens huddling together in public buildings. But, you know, as an emergency measure, it seems that that's what we're going to have to do. So, yeah, you know, this issue is going to be coming back to every council meeting, I think, because I think we're facing an absolutely terrible winter and terrible outcomes for our citizens. And I actually don't think that anything that we as a council can do will be enough, but at least we are trying. So I commend the measures indicated in this paper, Convener. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comments, and I think you're absolutely right when we consider that not only are we financially a rich country, we're also an energy-rich country, and yet here we are discussing opening libraries and community centres so that people can be warm. I mean, it's absolutely abhorrent, absolutely shameful, and it is an indictment on the lack of leadership that we're seeing at a national level, I think. And again, any leadership that we can show locally, whilst it will not touch the sides in terms of the overall problem, I think it's really important that we're standing up and we're being counted in terms of standing by our citizens at their time of need. Councillor El Nakla.
Thank you. I don't know if it's a question or just a comment, but we've seen the hashtag freeze prices, not people, and I'm just wondering what pressure we can actually apply to try to encourage the prices to be frozen. You know, we see a lot through the movement of people, so maybe that, as you're saying, as leaders, we should be standing up and actually having this winter's discontent, but actually showing our discontent. I'm just want maybe as a collective we can come up with an idea of how to do that, and if there is any way to actually apply pressure so that we're not just talking about freezing prices, but we are the consumers. There must be a way for us to keep pushing through that message. So yeah, I don't know if that was a question. There's maybe a question in there, but maybe it's one for a later date where we can
I'll hear the question that I think Jan's asked, which is in terms of that leadership question. So I think there is a way that we can be quite vocal in that, not only as a collective in terms of the council, but as individual representatives within our communities, being that voice, being that leader. And I certainly know that in my role as leader of the council, I'm taking that into every conversation that I have, whether that be with UK government or Scottish government, or the energy companies indeed, because let's not forget that we do have interactions directly with the energy companies. Now, it's probably not at the right level and it's probably not the right individuals, but the more we can apply that pressure, the better. And I think the other thing, as part of the work that's underway in terms of Fuel Well 3 and has been under Fuel Well 1 and 2, there is a vast amount of data that we're collecting just in terms of what people are dealing with, the real hardship. And I think that can be used to show the real concern that we have, to illustrate the scale of those problems and challenges faced by citizens. I should caveat that it's anonymised data, so but it's really important that we use everything at our disposal to advocate for people that perhaps don't have a voice or unable to articulate it in the right way. So I think that's a really well-made point. Bailey Scott, I'll come to you next.
Thanks, Convener. I'm pleased this has come forward, and I signpost people towards this and raise it whenever I can. It's an important issue. It's probably the biggest issue that's faced us in generations, and it's important that both Scottish and Westminster governments do all they can to help our citizens. There's two issues, though, I wanted to ask about, which are raised with me quite regularly. The first is standing charges. While the price of energy has gone up, the means of delivering it hasn't gone up. And I just wondered whether any representations are being made to try and limit the amount of standing charges, because while people may find ways of saving the use of energy, they have to pay the standing charges and have no control over that. And the second thing that's been raised with me recently is from small businesses in Dundee. Small businesses, there isn't a cap on their fuel usage, and some small businesses have been speaking to me about the increase in their electricity charges going up by tens of thousands of pounds. And I just wondered if there's anything we're doing about that to support our small businesses.
Thanks for your questions. I think, yeah, just going back to the first point, in terms of cost of living, that's an active discussion that's underway through the Fairness Leadership Panel, and I'm very keen that the Leadership Panel, as the body for the city that represents everything in terms of various organisations, the council and people with lived experience, is the voice for seeking those responses, particularly on issues like the standing charge, which is one that has been raised. So let me take that away with me, Bailey Scott, and I will make sure that those representations are made either through the panel or directly through my office. The only note I would say is my last letter that I sent in January took 7 months to receive a response, so perhaps don't wait for a response anytime soon. On the second part, on business hardship, and I'll defer to officers in a moment, you will recall that we did set aside £500,000 for the purpose of looking at business support. Now, that was in response to kind of post-COVID recovery rather than cost of living crisis, but nonetheless, there will be detail that will come forward in due course around that vehicle and the support that's available, and perhaps officers will be able to say a little bit more. Now, I'm scrolling down here to see if we have any of the relevant officers, given that we don't have city development here this evening. And I don't think we do. So Greg, can I defer to you in the first instance, and perhaps if that's something we can follow up with city development and circulate any information around elected members thereafter?
Yeah, thanks, convener. So Neil Martin's on the call, but I would rather take the query to Robin and Gregor and circulate an update to all elected members during the week, if that's agreeable.
Yeah, I think that's sensible. Thank you very much. Thanks, Derek. Okay, Councillor Toland.
Thank you. I know that it's getting late and we've still got a lot to go through, but I hope you don't mind indulging me just to make a kind of broader political point here. And John, you alluded to earlier that we can pile in the cash at a local or national level, but it will not resolve the problems. And what we have is a situation where I can't remember who it was that said, but I think it was Ken that said 70–80% of people will be in fuel poverty. But actually what we've got is record profits by the energy companies as well. So coming onto the agenda across Europe and within Scotland as well, Nicola Sturgeon just mentioned it yesterday, EDF had been nationalised by France in an attempt to curb these prices. Maybe nationalisation needs to come back onto the agenda, and maybe as broadly social democratic parties within the council, we should be kind of bringing that back onto the agenda as something that we could push towards at a UK and a Scottish level when we become independent.
Thanks very much, Siobhan. Absolutely endorse those comments, as you'll probably not be surprised to hear. Bailey Keenan, come to you.
Obviously, I wouldn't have an issue with nationalising industries such as electricity and the vital supplies that we need, even telecommunications. The points that were raised earlier by Councillor Cruikshank in relation to families with that have a disabled person that they're caring for. And I've been in individuals' houses that have got a hospital bed in the back room, and that carer's put an endless effort in getting a very small carer's allowance. And they're sitting at home starting to worry about, obviously, the price of fuel, as everybody sitting at home is starting to worry about the price of fuel. And I'm wondering whether officers can take that particular area and start to look at it from the point of view. We're obviously discussing what is likely to be a cap, but we're not really discussing what the energy use of that individual would be if they've got a great deal of ancillary equipment that needs to run in their home, that's running away with electricity 24/7. And so we're not taking into account what they're going through and the bill that's facing them. And of course, if we take into account that level of care that they're delivering would cost absolutely thousands in the public purse, should it have to be delivered elsewhere. So, whilst I've often tried to help individuals that are carers, and they often disappear off the radar because they just accept that's the lot that they've got, I think that it is a duty upon us to try to look to see whether that's an area that really needs that extra focus. You know, it's all right. You know, I could even think of myself when I hear Tory ministers saying we're doing something to help everybody. I'm wondering when it's getting to me, but I'm certainly looking to be a bit more caring and think that there is always somebody out there that's worse off than I am. And I think that in among that carers groups, that's the case. The point that Bailey Scott raises in relation to small business, there's a real issue in relation to energy costs in business in general. Because if the energy costs go up that much, if a small business, you know, when COVID was on the go and the business in Dundee was trying to recover, I was arguing about with officers to try to get the street pavement cafe open for them, knowing that they employ 9 people. So a very, very small employer employs 9 people. There's 9 other individuals getting a wage of it. If electricity pushes that business to closure and food prices and all the rest of it that they can't pass on to their customer, then there'll be an awful lot more people in the city in a worse state than they are now. So there's a kind of duty on us to all kind of lobby. I mean, I would join any representation that we'd want to make to the UK and the Westminster governments, because I think these things need to be spelled out. You know, we need to do a bit more, but there are certainly areas in the city that need to target a bit more. And I'd like, obviously, to see some effort going in relation to these people with disabilities, or that are looking after their family with disabilities.
Thanks very much for your contribution. I think there was an absolute and firm commitment from officers to go away and look at that and provide more detail as well. So I think you've got that on record, and I would certainly endorse that as well. And on your businesses, both comments are well made. I'm very conscious that everybody, business and individual, is suffering the consequences right now because of the you know, ridiculous escalation in costs associated with energy usage. We saw headlines just last month, folk like Jamie Scott announcing that he didn't know whether he was going to be able to continue running his premises because the energy costs, I believe, had went from something like £18,000 per year to 90. So I think your point's well made. What we can do, how we can leverage or push, absolutely open-minded in that, and I'll happily work across the chamber to push that as well. I think that goes without saying. Right, the last contribution will be Councillor Finnegan, and then I'll move on to the next item. Jax.
Hi, yeah, sorry, it was just to add on, there's been a lot spoken about hospital beds and equipment that use electricity. I just want to make everybody aware that these are actually prescribed equipment. So there is a prescriber that prescribes your hospital profiling bed or your air mattress, your CPAP machine, your hoist, your recliner chairs, your feed pump, that all use electric. And for last few years now, I've been asking, when the assessment is done for these people to receive these equipment, that we look at people's finances, because often it's a case of somebody needs the hospital bed, not just for themselves, which primarily it is, it's the best, it's for their comfort, their ease of use and help their mobility, but it's also to protect the carers as well. So their manual handling technique is fine, and also their pressure areas, and that it all comes at a cost. And I think fundamentally the prescriber is responsible for a lot of that. They need to discuss finances with the people that these are prescribing the equipment for, but often, with all the goodwill in the world, the health and social care staff don't have that opportunity, as you get told that somebody's coming out of Nine Wells or another hospital, they need a hospital bed and they need it yesterday. You know, so there does need to be something right at the grassroots of that, where we're implementing and looking at people's finances. That was all.
Thanks very much, Jax. I think that's a really important point, and I'll defer to your superior knowledge in terms of your experience as well. So I think that's really valid, and I think in the broader context of what we're talking about tonight is another example of some of the challenges that people face in the city, people perhaps that don't often have a very loud voice in these conversations. So it's good that we're hearing them tonight through contributions as well. Thank you very much. Okay, with all of that, I hope that we're in a position where we are agreed on this item. Okay, thank you very much. Willie?
Thanks very much. Takes on to item 6, the Revenue Monitoring Report. You asked to agree the recommendations.
Again, I'll limit my introductions. So is there any questions or comments on this? Councillor Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Convener. It's just 6.1 bullet point 2. The issue of energy cost pressures is highlighted.
Daniel, sorry for interrupting you. My audio went a little bit at the start. Could you direct me to what you were, which point in the agenda you were talking about there? Sorry.
It's no problem. I thought you were about to say speaking on the right. I'm like a half-wit, so I'm glad it wasn't that. Right, okay. At 6.1 bullet 2, the issue of energy cost pressures is highlighted, and it's unsurprisingly position where even after general reserve is set aside to try and meet increasing costs, there's still a cost pressure of nearly £500,000. Can I ask, given the continuing increases in estimates of fuel costs going forward, if officers are confident overspends projected of over 3.5 million are likely to be the actual overspend? I mean, given this estimate was the we're all going to be going up, and non-domestic is not capped, non-domestic energy use is not capped, I struggle to see that this will be the limit of the overspend. We've seen headlines of possible 3-day weeks in England for schools, and other Scottish authorities have closure or reduction of services due to energy costs. Given the increasing cost of energy, could officers also commit if there's any likelihood of a reduction in public services in Dundee to make savings, or more bluntly, because we simply cannot afford it because of the increase in
Thanks. I'm just going to look around my screen to clarify, because your audio was a bit funny. I don't know if was it just me? No, it wasn't. Okay, it was everybody. Daniel, I think we got the gist of what you're saying, but your connection wasn't fantastic, so you might want to try and switch off your camera if you're having any challenges. But I think it got hopefully the gist of what you were asking there, and I'll defer to officers to come in and answer the substantive point, particularly Paul. But if I can just offer at the start couple of comments. So I think you're absolutely right. This is an area that we've already increased the allocation in the recent budget to try and account for increases in costs. But what we're seeing is those costs escalating at a far greater rate than anybody anticipated. And of course, we've got a very large footprint in terms of our asset base and very intensive use of some buildings. So you look at our school, our community spaces, our swimming pools, for example, which can be extremely intensive. Ice arenas and other examples. I think we're going to continue to see that challenge. I don't think officers will be in a position to answer your last point, because ultimately those are political decisions and will be considered as part of the discussions and debates that we have through committee. But Paul, if I can just bring you in to answer the substantive point, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Alexander, and thank you for the question. So I can confirm in relation to the price that the council pays for energy, that will have no impact on the forecast moving forward, because the price for the current year, or the energy, has already been purchased. Where we may see variations in the projection is in relation to the volume of energy that's used. So we will continue to monitor the outturn on a monthly basis and report any changes back to committee.
Thanks very much, Paul. Daniel, any follow-up? I can't see you now, I'm conscious, so
No,
I'll ask you.
I've turned my camera off to see if it helps. Thank you for that point. I just have to say, the fact we're discussing warm banks and even discussing a reduction in essential services when certain companies are making record profits, it's for one word for me, it's simply scandalous. And the government need to get a grip.
Yeah, thank you. I would just caution, we're not talking about cuts to services. So again, if we get to a point where we're looking at the overall financial position of the council, that will be a consideration for all of us when we're looking at the budget setting process. I think Paul's answer was clear in saying that there's not an anticipated increase in cost because we've purchased the electricity for the year ahead. So just to note that. I see no other questions or comments on this item, so can I take that as agreed? Thank you very much. Willie?
Thanks very much. Item 7 then before you is the Scotland Excel Commercial Partnership Proposal, and you're asked to give the recommendations.
Again, self-explanatory. I think it's obviously important to note that this will hopefully support the delivery of the council's procurement strategy and the community wealth building strategy. Is there any questions or comments on this item? No. Can I take that as a Councillor Short, I'm not sure what C means. I'm presuming comment.
It does mean comment, yes. It was very, very shorthand. I just wanted to put on record how much I appreciated Paul Thompson's time. As you probably know, I've gone on to the Scotland Excel board as part of duties within the council, and I appreciated going over this with me and giving me a wee bit heads up before I go in to get the full on training from them. So yes, very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. I see no other questions or comments, so can I take this as agreed? Thank you very much. Willie?
Okay, it takes on to the remaining item 8, National Care Service, Scotland Bill. Your recommendations.
Members from pre-election will recall that we previously debated this and made numerous contributions to the wider debate on the approach it's taken on National Care Service. I think this is important just as an update, and also provides information on the extent to which the publication of the bill clarifies the issues which were highlighted at that City Council meeting. I'll just go straight to questions. So I'm going to hold you to the block capital brief, Bailey McPherson, so please go on.
Yeah, I don't want to rehash the debate we previously had, convener, but I do want to place on record our group's opposition to the concept of the National Care Service, which there are a couple of points in Appendix 2 where it refers to principles supported by the council, and that's why I mention it. Now, I fully accept there was a vote that night, and that is indeed the council's position, but it's not our group's position. We feel that it's unfortunate centralisation. It will cost millions to set up at a time the money would be better spent on NHS backlogs, the cost of living crisis, tackling that, etc., etc. But we feel it's a big loss to local government as well. And I'm interested to note that the Institute for Fiscal Studies has warned that the plans could see a postcode lottery in services. I don't want to go into the detail of that tonight because I promised to be brief, but and we will not be moving anything to the contrary, but we do wish to place on record our concerns about this National Care Service proposal. Thank you, convener.
Thanks very much, and thanks for your brevity. I appreciate it. And again, not to rehash the debate that we had before, but respect your point of view, and I'm sure you'll respect that it's in my party's manifesto, and we're delivering that manifesto commitment after winning the election. So with that, I will bring in Councillor Shears.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't part of that debate, given it was the previous term, but just to make a brief comment that the National Care Service was a National Labour Party policy. It's a policy I agree with, but really like to draw attention to the very last paragraph in the report, which does call for ministers to remove the powers for ministers to transfer a wider range of statutory functions, because this is centralisation. Adult social care is what the National Care Service should be about, nothing else. So just to draw attention to that there.
Thanks very much for your comments, and I think, again, not to you can watch the meeting if you wish to do so. They're all available online, Councillor Shears, but obviously it was a commitment that we're delivering on. I think the debate and discussion that we had previously was about some of those additional functions, and our clear view that in some of those we would like to see them retained at a local level. So there was an honest and frank debate around that, but I think the commitment to a National Care Service and what it potentially delivers in terms of a step change in approach is really important, and something that I think is broadly welcomed. I'll bring in Councillor McHugh next. Dorothy.
Thank you. It doesn't say brief in the chat, but I will be brief. We've discussed this topic many times at the Integrated Joint Board, and I'm very pleased to see the recommendation at 4.6 in the report, recommending that work with COSLA and the Scottish Government to identify the implications of these proposals for services in terms of local democracy, local accountability, and staffing issues. So I read all the way through all the comments, and I think it's a fair summary. We have reservations in many areas, and I think that's clear. So I'm happy to see that 4.6 recommendation.
Thanks very much. I think the report before us certainly seeks to strike that balance and, you know, hopefully gets to a position where we can at least agree to disagree on some of the substantive items, but agree with the fundamental basic principles of the approach that's been taken. So thanks for your comments. Bailey Scott.
Thanks, Convener. Like others, I think that provision of care should be retained at local level, not least because of all the joined up services that we need to provide. But I appreciate that if it's to become a reality, that the council needs to put forward its views on all the aspects to do with a national care service to make sure we do get the best possible outcomes if it should go forward. So while I don't agree with the theme of a national care service, I think it's important that we respond to these consultations.
Yep, thank you very much for your comments, Billy Scott. And the last contribution is from Councillor Lynn.
Yeah, I thought I better say something since I'm chair of the IJB, which will also be discussing this yet again at our meeting on Wednesday. I think it's a good response from Dundee City Council, but I would remind members that in a lot of ways we're still at the broad brushstrokes stage, and there's a lot to be decided over the coming weeks, months and years about how the National Care Service will look when it's finally established, and not the least of these is whether or not children's services and justice services will come under the umbrella of the National Care Service. There's no decision yet on what geographic areas the care boards will cover, whether that will mirror the existing arrangements for the IJBs or whether it will be bigger. So yeah, lots still to work out over the years, and I'm sure that we as a council will be part of that debate and will contribute in a positive way to what I think is a positive step forward in the creation of a National Care Service. So thanks for giving me the final word.
Thank you very much. It's not often I do that. So with all of that, can I take this item as agreed? Thank you very much. That's been lengthy. Thanks for all your contributions, your patience and your stamina. We shall see you again very soon. Have a good week, everyone. Cheers.
Cheerio.